Swing, fly ball center. Myers on his horse, going back, track ball, it's gone! 3-run homer for Gorman. Squibber toward third, tough play. Glove, grab, throw, bad throw. That'll get away and score a run. Donovan scores. Newt to second, race to third. Nobody's home. Throw is gonna be late. Hot dog, the Cardinals have an extra run. It's 5-2. There's a little flare into right. Hit for Gorman will score the 6th run. Fly ball right. Burleson's there. How sweep it is. The Cardinals take care of the Marlins. 6-4 is your final score. What a homestand for the Redbirds.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. That is what it sounded like yesterday on Bally Sports Midwest as the Cardinals come away with yet another victory. They've won 5 straight, 8 of their last 10. Alex, this is the team that we all thought that we were going to see in 2023. Now, it happened, 3 months later than any of us were anticipating, but here we are nonetheless. The Cardinals offense has heated up. They're batting .285 as a team in this 10-game stretch. Their pitching staff has finally started to alleviate the issues that we saw for the vast majority of the season. Over the last 10 games, their rotation has a 2.4 ERA. Alex, it even sustained through a game in which they had a bullpen game. When these were the names that they threw out there, Dakota Hudson, Zach Thompson, Andre Palante, Ryan Tepera in a high leverage situation with multiple men on, had to get out of that spot, found a way out of it. I was shocked they used him in that situation. Good for Tepera for figuring a way through that. And then they closed the game with Chris Stratton. That game, when they threw those pitchers against Sandy Alcantara, they found a way to win in order to get their 5th straight victory. Their rotation now has a 2.5 ERA in the last 10 games. This is the team that we all expected to see. It just might be a little, too late.
You going through that list of pitchers, some people hear that and say, oh man, they found a way to win with those guys. I looked at it as the Cardinals saying, hey, teams, look what we've got via trade. Anybody want one of these guys? Because Chris Stratton's a closer now. If you want to trade for him, it's going to cost you. This is the frustrating part of it all, and I'm not saying it's going to result in the same thing because I don't believe it will, and I do believe the team is still going to sell. But this is what the Blues in 2019 were. It was so freaking frustrating up until December because you looked at it and you said, why is this team bad? Because they've got everything you want. They've got the offense, i.e. one of the best offenses in baseball. They've got the pitchers. If you look at what they did last year and how they pitched, they should be the same guys. The defense should be there, and the bullpen, well, that's upgraded. But it never fanned out. And when it finally did, you're like, okay, but is it too little too late? And, of course, we all know how that went. I just don't believe the Cardinals can put that together for the rest of the season because John Mozeliak made his statement known that, look, we're going to be selling and looking at 2024, and if we tumble into a playoff run, then so be it, but we're addressing this team for 2024. But with that being said, you just watched them do this against the Marlins. The Nationals, not so much. They're a bad team, but you saw them overcome the odds with the White Sox, and those odds being the amount of errors they committed, and then even the success that they had against the Yankees. They're putting wins together, which is fun, and it gives you optimism, but I still look at this and say they're going to sell, and that means they're going to fall just a little too short.
Yeah, I'm not falling for this fool's gold because they did this in May. Yeah. And I remember going, they might be back. And then it was like June hit, and I was like, oh, yeah, no, still the same team.
No, it was 2 weeks later, and it was, that's not them.
I thought they were tired, from that long, 19 and 19 days. And then they had 2 full days off, and then they laid an egg in Pittsburgh.
They did get some days off, though.
I've seen this team put runs like this together, and then they eventually revert back to who they truly are, which is a bad baseball team. And I expect that to happen still. So, and I think Mo's made up his mind, and I don't think he's going to change it. He may alter how much much of a sell it becomes, but they are still sellers in my mind. So I'm not falling for this fool's gold that they're going to be playing this great baseball and now they can go on a run and they can have their own version of the 2019 Blues run, or they can go back to what the 2011 run was. No, they are a flawed baseball team that's too inconsistent in their rotation, that somehow won yesterday with Dakota Hudson starting with Zach Thompson piggybacking with him. No, I'm not falling for this fool's gold. It's great to see them starting to play better baseball just because it's more fun to watch, but they are still definite sellers when we get to the trade deadline.
And they should be definite sellers.
And we'll talk a little bit more about that in the next segment, talking about kind of what this all means in the big picture and where they stand when it comes to sellers versus buyers versus a little bit of both. You guys know I said the same thing yesterday. I agree with you. I think that's exactly the way that they should approach it. Take this for what it is. A nice stretch. A nice stretch. You've played 10 quality games in a row for like the second time all year long. Guys, we've played 100 games almost. 10 games out of 100 does not mean you're a good team. In fact, if we are looking at this last 10-game stretch and saying, here it is, that's 10% of your schedule. That means that you have been an atrocity for the vast majority of it. So yeah, this is too little too late. It's nice to see, though, because at least we know when they play well, they've got the core that can be a contending squad, and I think that says good things for next year. The biggest stuff that's changed, guys, is like, they're playing better defense. They've had moments where it's been frustrating, kind of like in that series against Chicago, like you mentioned there, Alex. But Arenado, Nolan Arenado yesterday, that was the best defensive game I've seen from him so far this season. It might have been, like, just looking overall, his best game of the season. When you're taking into account offense, defense, everything that goes into it. He's got a 1250 OPS offensively over this 10-game stretch in which the Cardinals have been excellent. By the way, guys, don't look now. He's batting .290 on the season, and he's on pace to basically be the exact same guy that he's been every year of his major league career, where he's going to hit 35 home runs and 120 RBIs. Like, Nolan Arenado is Nolan Arenado, and the defense is starting to get back on track. Wilson Contreras, the guy that you mentioned, T-Bone, the defense has been horrible, but his offense has really come to life, really over the last month or so. But in this 10-game stretch, he's got an OPS of 1,200.
Yeah, what's that?
And now you're starting... Huh?
What's that number say, T-Bone? His OPS?
Yeah, what's his F4?
Oh, jeez.
They can't be good with that defense.
What's his FU?
So Contreras is hitting the ball again. Nolan Gorman, by the way, has come back to life. 950 OPS in his last 10 games. His OPS in the month of July is back up. He had a terrible June, but otherwise has been good this year. Burleson's hitting the ball really well. Donovan's doing the thing where he gets on base seemingly every time that he goes up to bat. Like, you're starting to see this lineup come together. And then I'm going to read you off the ERAs for the 4 starters that this Cardinals team expected to be in the rotation to come into this season over their last 10 starts. Michaelis 1.7, Jack 2.1, Monty 1.7, Matt's 3.7. That's really that's the star of the show there. That's what's changed. Their starting pitching is giving them an opportunity to win these games, even when they have a guy like Dakota Hudson on the mound yesterday, Alex.
Yeah, Dak is bleeping back as T-Bone. T-Bone was just wrong on the guy he thought was bleeping back. It wasn't Jack. It was Dak. Dak is back.
Jack's been really good, too.
Okay, yeah, you're good enough there. That to me is probably the more infuriating part, is now you're getting all of this from these pitchers, and like, you can't use they were at the World Baseball Classic and it finally clicked in. It's freaking July. There's no way that all of a sudden it just started to click, which is why I kind of want to see it continue. I mean, look, you're going to take on the Cubs here. I think you're the better team than the Cubs, but you are taking on a superior pitching staff, at least overall on the season. How do you perform there? But when you look at those numbers, it at least gives you optimism, because if you've got Arenado and Contreras, I mean, Goldschmidt's name's not even in this list, and I'm sure he's doing really well. Gorman, Burleson, Donovan, like that's depending on what you do at the trade deadline in the offseason, that's kind of the core that you're building around. And then you're pitching. If Michaelis and Matz are providing you that, and maybe you could find a way to get Montgomery back next season, not sure if that's possible, then you're filling a couple of spots on the pitching side of things. But the issue for me, and why I'm always so skeptical, is because this can't happen late July and then you go on a deep run and get into the playoffs and sneak in. You need to start doing this consistently from April until July.
Yeah, and that's why when you look at what they do at the deadline, they need, and in the offseason, they need to avoid being this second half team going into 2024. And that starts with the rotation. Each year for the last, 4 years, there's always been a hole, it feels like, or two holes that they have to go plug at the trade deadline in the rotation. And as we've seen, this offense is good enough to where it could keep you afloat early on in the year. But build the team early on from the get-go to where the starting pitching, when you look at it going into the season in 2024, doesn't just keep you afloat for the first half, but actually gets you off to a fast start so you can just build upon it in the second half. That's the big thing for me, outside of just looking at it and saying, oh, we got to go get pitching. Like, that is true. But when you go and get that pitching, have the intention of being able to just take off right from the get-go of opening day, because the last couple of years, it's just been they kind of go along right around that 500 mark, and then they make some moves, and boom, they take off in the second half. Build the team to be that quote-unquote second-half team right when things get going. That way you can avoid slow starts and then feeling like you've got to climb way back up in the standings, because that's been the detriment this year. Is I think we can look back on this year, and yes, the rotation, like, I don't think it was ever good enough to make the playoffs. We can look back on the first month and just say that was the month that really just ended the Cardinals season.
And somebody just texted in saying that Alex is riding his horrible takes right now to the off of the cliff. This Cardinals team is not the same as a hockey season. It says baseball is a game of streaks, and right now the Cardinals are in one. Yeah, you know what streaks have gotten this Cardinals team in the past? T-Bone, help me clear my mind a little bit. What happened when they went on a 17-game win streak and got to the playoffs?
Well, they made the playoffs.
Oh, yeah? What'd they do in the playoffs?
Well, it doesn't really matter. It was one game.
Yeah, that's right. Choked. Like, I don't need streaks. I need consistency. Now you're at least showing consistency, but what Tanner said earlier, BK, is right. You did this already in May. You did it for 2 weeks, and you did it against better opponents, and you still did not stay consistent. That's what I want the rest of the way, and frankly, that's what you need in 2024.
Yeah, I think their point was this is different than hockey, and I just, sure, maybe it is, but eventually you got to decide in the NHL or in Major League Baseball or whatever sport it is that you're playing what your team is capable of. And the Cardinals, much like the Blues, are not capable of going on a run. They're just not. They don't have the pitching to be consistent. Like, as much as I loved what we saw yesterday, guys, if they go into the playoffs and they've got Zach Thompson, Andre Palante, Ryan Tepera, Chris Stratton, and the other guys that they've got in their bullpen as consistent arms that they're using coming out of that bullpen, they're going to get lit up. Because that's not gonna line up against some of the best teams that they're going up against in Major League Baseball. Like, they do not have the pitching. The same issues that we've talked about all year long, they're still there. The Cardinals are just finding ways to mask them right now because they are winning in other ways. The defense is stepping up. You are getting more consistent quality starting pitching. And the offense has been great. Like, you look at their last 5 games during this winning streak, they've given up 6, 4, 4, 2, and 4 in terms of the runs allowed. The difference is they're scoring 9, 8, 6, 5, and 6. So, as much as we want to talk about they're playing well right now, and they are, they're just masking some of the deficiencies that we've talked about all year long. Final thing that I wanted to get to here, just before we get out, I do want to see more of Dakota Hudson. I do want to see more of Zach Thompson, because those guys, while not perfect yesterday or haven't been perfect this year, man, Dakota Hudson has a 2.8 ERA on the season. That's better than most of the pitchers that we've seen from the Cardinals in 2023. Zach Thompson, I didn't even know he was on the roster going into yesterday. Like, I legitimately forgot he was a part of the team. The last time that he had pitched in a big league game was April 30th. He had not thrown a pitch at the big or minor league level in 3 weeks, dude. 3 weeks.
What was it, like 39 days or something like that? I heard him say?
At some point, you have to give this guy an opportunity. We know he's not a starter. He's terrible in that capacity. Find out what he can do for you as a reliever, and if he fails in that way too, fine. But you need to find out. It is time to get some answers on some of these players, just like we've talked about in the outfield. Now let's do it with the pitching staff as well. The 2 guys that immediately come to mind for me in that regard are Zach Thompson and Dakota Hudson. Coming up in about 15 minutes or so, we'll dive into some NFL quick hitters here on BK and Ferrario. If you guys haven't checked us out yet, please do so on YouTube at 101 ESPN STL is where you can go to find us. You can also get involved in the show. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to do so. But coming up next, Alex, as much as you, me, and I would say the majority of the audience are all on the same page with this team, they are not going to be buyers. This is not a team that feels like they should be or will be in contention at the deadline. Let's play devil's advocate for a moment. What would it look like if they did talk themselves into contention at this year's deadline? What would it take? What is the history of teams like that? We'll tell you next here on 101 ESPN.
This is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
And right now, I think the Cardinals have enough talent on their roster based on the schedule they have remaining to wake up the ghost. Do I think they can deter John Mozeliak of taking advantage of an opportunity? He's definitely not adding, but you could see a situation. I think the Cardinals are going to sell. I think guys are going to get traded. I don't think they're going to add any major pieces, but don't be shocked if young guys get an opportunity and the core stays and remains and they actually continue to play really well down the stretch.
That was Greg Amsinger earlier today on the opening drive alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Amsinger stated what is essentially the obvious there. The Cardinals are not legitimate contenders right now. No team really is when you are 10 games below 500, 96 games into the season. But Alex, I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because we all know where we stand on this team. None of us in this room, you, me, T-Bone, think that the Cardinals should or will be buyers at the trade deadline. But they have won 5 in a row. And I think it's fair to say that there's at least a segment of the audience right now that's listening to us that's saying, why can't you guys dream a little bit? They've won 8 of their last 10. They've won 5 straight. This is a terrible division. We've seen them go on big winning streaks before. This is a second half team. Maybe they will find a way to get back into this. Okay, let's apply that logic for a moment, Alex, if you don't mind. I looked in yesterday to the teams that were at least 2 games back on the trade deadline since 2012 that went on to win their respective division. And there were a decent number of them over the last decade or so. But really, I want to focus on the teams that were 5 or more games out that went on to win their division in that respective season. And I'm focusing on the division and not the wild card because the Cardinals have basically no chance to realistically get into the wild card this year. The teams that were at least 5 games back at that year's trade deadline that went on to win their division since 2012. In 2015, there were 2 of them. It was Toronto. They were 6 games back. They were 53-51. If you remember that Toronto team, Alex, that was the year they basically went all in. They decided to make big deals at the trade deadline, including trading for Tulowitzki, and they ended up losing to the Royals in the postseason. But that was a really good baseball team that severely underperformed expectations. They were 6 games back in the AL East, and they were 53-51 at the trade deadline, went on a crazy run in the second half of the season. Texas, that same season, was 7 games back at 50-52 and went on to win the AL West. The only other team since 2012 that won the division after being at least 5 games back at the deadline was the 2021 Atlanta Braves, and we all know that story. 5 games back, 51-54 at the trade deadline, ended up going on to win the World Series after trading for a bunch of outfield help. They were dealing with injuries, they were dealing with issues all year long, just never really found their footing despite being talented, and of course, goes on to win the World Series after adding the necessary pieces at the trade deadline. Alex, when you hear those and you think about where the Cardinals are at right now, does it give you any confidence that the Cardinals could be the 4th team in the last 10 years to win their division after being at least 5 games back at the trade deadline?
Man, you're pushing me in a corner here where if I don't say it gives me hope, then I look like a jerk. But if I say there's hope, they're going to call me a liar. Look, things happen like that. I mean, nobody thought the Atlanta Braves were going to be able to pull that off. And the one thing that I can think of that Atlanta Braves season was they were without Ronald Acuna Jr. basically all of it. Like, you take out your best player, nobody's going to expect you to be good. And they found a way to overcome that. The Cardinals, to me, are different because it's not like they're playing this season without Nolan Arenado and saying, well, how are we going to overcome this loss? So we'll find some way to pull a rabbit out of our hat and make a push. This is, we played bad with our best players available to us pretty much half of the season, and we've got to find a way to turn it around. But I'll go down the path with you and say, like, look, if they find a way between now and August 1st, and mainly what you're going to have to do is win 5 of 6, maybe all 6 against the Cubs. If you put yourself within 5 games of the top 2 teams in the NL Central, yeah, then there should be confidence in a lot of people, and I'll be one of them that says, hey, maybe they can get this done, because you know what that means? That means you went significantly above 500 in your final 11 games going into the trade deadline, which is about a 4-week span of you putting consistent efforts out on the field. And that is something you haven't done all season. So I can look at that and say, yeah, you know what? There is some optimism here. but that still doesn't change my mindset going into August 1st. I still think you need to trade certain players off of this roster and gain some assets because you're still not going to be good enough for 2024. And that's where you are going to have to upgrade. If you go on some type of unbelievable run and get into the playoffs and make this deep run, great. Nobody saw that coming, and it's going to be a story we tell everybody about. But you still need to improve yourself for 2024 because you can't keep trying to make history every season.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that's a good way to put it, is you need to improve for 2024, but I can see, like, walking down this path with you guys, I can see where they go into, if they get within, like, 5 games, I think that was the benchmark that you put on it, where they decide to not make this a gigantic sale. I think they're still going to sell some pieces, like I think Jack's still probably gone, but I can see where they can talk themselves into not necessarily being buyers. I think they would still look to pull off that kind of, what would you call it, buy/sell deal where you sell like a Carlson, but you're gaining a controllable pitcher back in return. And then you can just kind of put them into the rotation and you maybe hold on to Montgomery and, okay, let's just see what it looks like. Why not? Why not? Why not just see if we can get hot? And the other thing that I think kind of banks into this is, and BK, I'm curious your thoughts here. I don't expect Milwaukee to be aggressive, to be overspending and buying a lot at the deadline. They may look to add like a bullpen arm or something small. Same with Cincinnati. I don't expect them to be super aggressive to where it's like, whoa, okay, they just made such a significant upgrade to their team to where now we really can't catch them because we're sitting pat at the deadline. Like, you get within 5 games, I can definitely see where the Cardinals would look at this and go, okay, we're not going to buy, but let's hold on to maybe 1 or 2 pieces that we thought about selling and just see what happens. Worst case scenario, we get into the playoffs, but you do still have to go make that move to where you acquire that controllable pitcher for 2024.
But you keep those pieces that you're not willing to trade because you think you got a chance to re-sign them, and that would be Montgomery and Hicks.
Yeah, agreed.
Other than that, I'm trading everybody else.
See, I think Hicks is probably a you got to trade him candidate because I don't think that there's any scenario in which it makes sense to re-sign him, given what his value is likely to be on the market. Like, I think Jack Flaherty, Jordan Hicks, and Tyler O'Neill are, no doubt about it, they have to be traded at the trade deadline this year. And then I'm with you on Montgomery. He would be a guy that if we dream a little bit and the Cardinals really go on a run here prior to the deadline, he would be the one that I'm currently anticipating the Cardinals trading that would maybe go into the, okay, let's hold here. Let's see what we can do with this. Because if you're trading Jack, if you're trading Hicks, and maybe even to the same team, for example, it's possible you get a starter in return. That is a little bit more term, and you end up seeing what that looks like. So you could still continue to win this year while also setting yourself up better for the future. The reason why I think any of this is interesting, honestly, is because of what the schedule's set up as for the next 11 games for the Cardinals and the next 10 games for the Brewers and Reds. The Cardinals over their next 11 games have 8 games head-to-head against the Chicago Cubs. Guys, have you seen what the Cubs have been doing lately?
Not very good.
It's been horrible. They look like a team that is going through their downward spiral. Meanwhile, you also have, by the way, 3 games against Arizona in this 11-game stretch. So 8 against Chicago, 3 against Arizona. That series against Arizona is going to mean a lot. They're a good team. The Brewers have 1 game left against Philly. Then they have 3 games at home and 3 games on the road against Atlanta. So 6 games head-to-head against the Braves, who I think are the best team in baseball. 3 games head-to-head against the Reds, and the Reds in this stretch have 1 more game against San Francisco, 3 against Arizona, much like you do, and then 3 at Milwaukee and 3 at the Dodgers. Guys, these schedules set up in a way where it should not surprise anybody if the Brewers and Reds both win 4 or fewer games in their next 10 prior to the trade deadline. Like, it could be totally in play that those teams both go something like 3-7. If you go like 8-3 in that same stretch over your next 11 games and you are 5 games back of the Brewers, 3 games back of the Reds, I don't think that means you become buyers and you're now suddenly trading Mason Wynn and Dylan Carlson and Tink Hintz to go get that number 1 starter. But I do think it makes you reconsider what it looks like for Jordan Montgomery or Paul DeJong or maybe some of these other outfielders that you were otherwise considering trading at the deadline, not named Tyler O'Neill.
Yeah, but my only hesitation with that is I think I need to have a conversation with Jordan Montgomery before August 1st. Because if I realistically don't, if he tells me straight up, I'm testing free agency, don't really want to do an extension and want to see what's out there, still going to trade him because now I'm going to try and go on some type of magical run to get into the playoffs, maybe even miss the playoffs. But if I get in, nothing happens. And then I'm walking away from Jordan Montgomery because I know I don't have a shot. But if he gives me an inkling of hope that, yeah, you know what, I like St. Louis, and I'm not sure if I'm ready to sign now, but let's see what happens at the end of the season, and I'll talk to you guys before anything happens. Then, yeah, I would consider it if I'm in striking distance. So all of these stars have to align for me to look at this any differently. And the other factor in this 2BK is I don't know how John Mozeliak can change his mindset, because the way he phrased it was sell, sell, sell. It didn't sound like buyers and sellers. It did sound like...
Good point.
It did.
Good point. John Mozeliak definitely never goes back on his word.
Yeah.
What are you talking about? He said payroll was going to go up this season, and payroll went up this season.
Yeah,
Contreras
and
to
Wilson
catch in the future.
Contreras
He said they needed to get a catcher. Didn't they sign a catcher?
They want to. You would have to pry Dylan Carlson from his cold dead hands.
Have you seen him traded yet?
Tommy Edman is a very, very good shortstop. He's going to be starting every day at shortstop
until
for
Paul
them.
DeYoung, the king, returned.
Tyler O'Neill is going to be the starting center fielder for the Cardinals.
Yeah, that one you got, man.
I think that there's a chance that Mo might go back on his word. I'm going to go out on a limb here and say that is possible.
Yeah, well, it's going to be a bad offseason if you do that, my friend.
It could be. But like, the more that I look into what the returns are going to be, and we'll talk about this coming up in the 12 o'clock hour for some of these pitchers that you're looking to trade, man, all of these young starters stink. All of them. Ain't none of them worth their salt. So if the Cardinals are going to get like a AA starter that has a 5 ERA this season in return for Jordan Montgomery, or they could instead get a second round pick that Randy Flores gets to hand pick for them, like, I don't necessarily hate the idea of just taking the qualifying offer, slapping that on Jordan Montgomery, and either he ends up re-signing or you get the second round pick for him and we get to see Jordan Montgomery start more games for the Cardinals. I think that might end up being the best return that they can get for him. So if that's the route that they decide to go, I don't think it's the worst thing in the world. Jack Flaherty, though, Jordan Hicks, Tyler O'Neill, for me, those are the three that are absolutely gone once we get to the trade deadline, no matter what. Coming up next, let's dive into some NFL quick hitters. Guys, I've got some thoughts on these running backs. They're all crying poor, and honestly, I haven't heard a single compelling argument as to why teams should pay their running backs more. We'll discuss it next here on 101 ESPN. Hey, it's BK. Do you remember that childhood piggy bank that you had? The satisfaction that you felt when you were finally able to reap the rewards of all of your diligent savings? Well, with Truehold, you can access your biggest piggy bank yet, your home's equity. You'll start enjoying that retirement that you plan for right now without having to move, and here's how you can do it. Truehold will buy your home for its best current value while that value remains high, and you get to bank all the cash now while you continue living in your home for as long as you'd like. Plus, Truehold will cover all the property taxes, insurance, repairs, and maintenance too. And since they pay your home's current value in cash, that money is yours to do whatever you'd like with. Start enjoying your home's equity while it remains high by visiting Truehold.com, and you'll discover how much they'll buy your home for today based on its best current value and not what's coming. Call 1-855-300-9993 or visit Truehold.com for the smarter and faster way to cash out on your home's full value without having to move. That's 1-855-300-9993 or visit Truehold.com.
Center.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. The Cardinals beat the Marlins yesterday 6-4 as they sweep Miami, and they've won 5 in a row. And they start a 4-game set in Chicago tonight. 7:05 will be first pitch as Steven Matz gets the start for St. Louis, and Marcus Stroman will get the start for the Cubs. The Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your road trip 24/7 at londoff.com, londoffAutoplex.com. Are you kidding me?
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. In just about 10 minutes, we'll get to some questions and answers. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get your questions in. But right now, let's get into some NFL quick hitters. Alex, over the last week or so, there's been a whole hell of a lot of discourse about running backs and their inability to get paid on the open market. And this has really come to a head over the last few days when Saquon Barkley and Josh Jacobs and Tony Pollard, none of them got long-term extensions instead of their franchise tag. Alex, something that has really stuck in my craw this week is how many people are crying poor for these running backs that are on the franchise tag and their inability to get these long-term deals. Dude, I have not heard a single compelling case as to why teams should pay running backs over the long haul. There is no real reason to do it. And I would also add this, Alex. I have a really hard time looking at guys like Josh Jacobs or Tony Pollard who have really had one great season and saying, you know what? That's the guy you should pay on a long-term deal at the running back position. If you want to talk about Saquon, all right, we can have a separate conversation about him specifically. But with Pollard and Josh Jacobs, if I'm the Raiders, I do the same thing. If I'm the Cowboys, I do the same thing. And even if you think they deserve a long-term extension, Alex, here's the entire list of running backs that are getting paid more on an average basis than Pollard, Jacobs, and Saquon are making this year. It's not long. Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry, Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones. And if those guys get the tag again next year, they will make more next year than Nick Chubb or Aaron Jones. This franchise tag is not as bad for running backs as people are making it out to be. So what am I missing here? Is there something that I'm missing?
No, I don't think there's anything that you're missing. I'm on the same wavelength as you. I think year-to-year basis with running backs makes the most sense because we see guys like Isaiah Pacheco as the most recent example of you just find somebody who can come in and provide you what you need. I really think the reason that it's getting to this point is because these running backs know they hold all the cards. If you're Saquon, if you're Tony Pollard, if you're Josh Jacobs, at least for now, you can look at the team and say, you need me. Because if the Giants don't have Saquon, that team's going to be terrible. The Dallas Cowboys, if you're Tony Pollard, you look at it and you say, you saw what you were with Ezekiel Elliott as your running back the last couple of years. Imagine what that's going to be like this upcoming season if you're in this winning window. And then Josh Jacobs just had that 1,000 rushing yard season. So that's the only argument that I can use is that these guys know that they hold the cards because if these three specific teams say, fine, don't show up, we'll put somebody else in that spot, I think all three are going to have rough seasons.
Yeah, I tend to side with BK. Like, I don't understand them crying out poor, and I really don't understand the idea of, like, Saquon even just threatening to sit out the year. Like, okay, ask Le'Veon Bell how that went when he did it. Like, you know, for your point of they hold the cards, if I'm the Giants and Saquon says, I'm not signing a deal, I'm going to sit out, well, you know what? There's a bunch of other guys that would love your job right now. I bet Zeke would love to come to our team. I bet Kareem Hunt would love to come to our team. Leonard Fournette, who just worked out with the New England Patriots, like, though they may not be the same caliber of Saquon Barkley, that I'm not denying, you can just replace him in his spot and just try and work with that if you're the New York Giants or you're the Las Vegas Raiders or you're the Dallas Cowboys. I wouldn't pay a running back unless he put up the type of numbers that Christian McCaffrey did when he was healthy. And with, like, most of these guys, they've dealt with injuries, and that's why you don't pay a running back. We've seen teams make that mistake. The Rams made that mistake when they gave Todd Gurley a big contract extension. They had to get out of it within, like, 2 years because he couldn't remain healthy. So I don't get this crying poor for the running backs. I mean, I think the franchise tag's a great thing for all of these guys.
Absolutely.
And, like, you don't have to look far. Look at Saquon Barkley. In 2020, played in 2 games that season because of an injury, a serious injury. In 2021, he played in 13 games, but he only had 500 rushing yards. He finished the year with 2 touchdowns. I know their offense was really bad around him, but while he didn't miss a ton of games, he was constantly hurt that year, in and out of the lineup, nagging injuries. Last year was the first year since 2019 when we really saw Saquon take that step of being an elite level running back. So Saquon, if you want to get that long-term deal, it's going to be really hard for you because of your position. It's also going to be really hard for you because of your injury history, dude. Like, you sometimes have to just look in the mirror and see, okay, maybe I'm part of the problem here. Like, for example, right? I'll use myself as an example here. If I went to Hubbard Radio and said, guys, I want a 5-year guaranteed contract, they would come back to me and say, no, you're not getting that. You've been on the radio for 3 years. We're not just going to invest 5 years of guaranteed money into you, nor should they. It would be a silly thing to do. Meanwhile, if like Randy Carricker went to them and said the same thing, or Scott Rizzuto did, they would say, of course, because you guys are legends in this industry. There are different expectations for different people. My final point on this is as follows. Guys, even if we accept, like, okay, franchise tag, they don't like going year to year. Do you know how many current running backs have more guaranteed money on their contracts that have multi-year guaranteed money than what you would expect to see from Saquon, Josh Jacobs, or Tony Pollard if they got the franchise tag this year and next? 2 years of the franchise tag versus guaranteed money in multi-year running back contracts. How many guys do you think have more?
My guess would be 1, and that'd be McCaffrey.
Yeah, I was going to say 1 or 2.
It's
Henry.
3, but it's really tight with Derrick Henry.
Oh, I forgot
Alvin
about Henry.
Kamara had $33 million of guarantees in his deal, and Christian McCaffrey had 38. And then Derrick Henry's is basically the same, $25 million, which is essentially equivalent to what these guys would get over the next 2 years in fully guaranteed money via the franchise
All right,
tag.
man, we get it. You hate running backs.
That's the thing is, like, I would love to have Saquon Barkley on my team. He's so much fun to watch. I think Josh Jacobs was amazing last year. And I think Tony Pollard has a chance. Like, if you're drafting in fantasy, I would want Tony Pollard on my team this year because I think he's going to be awesome for the Dallas Cowboys. I just think this discussion that's taking place nationally about how running backs, you need to figure out a way to get them more money. No, you don't. This is what happens to relievers in Major League Baseball. You are replaceable. You are not something that is a commodity that teams value the same way that they do quarterbacks or that they do in baseball with starting pitching or position players. I'm sorry. This is the way that the world works. If your position is one that is as volatile as relievers in baseball or as running backs in the NFL, yeah, you're going to get replaced and you're not going to get that long-term deal. All right, enough of that.
Kind of feeling like
Alex,
you need a squirt right now.
Careful with that, dude.
You're kind of speaking
Careful.
down. You're speaking down to us.
Have you seen the Seattle Seahawks new uniforms?
Yeah. Yep.
What'd you think?
I like it.
I don't like it.
What?
I mean, they're fine. I prefer the neon green ones that they use now. That, like, the ones that are their regular ones, that's the ones I prefer. If this is a throwback one that you wear 3 times a season, fine. I don't like it though. I think it's too blue. It's just weird. It doesn't match the Seahawks. It's too freaking blue. And I understand it's what they used to wear in the 90s. Didn't like them then, don't like them now.
Really?
Yeah.
I really like these.
No, I see it.
I think they're some of the best uniforms in the NFL, and I think they should completely get rid of their modern quote-unquote look and just stick with these throwbacks. These are incredible.
No, the ones they're wearing now are the ones that need to stay. Those are the ones I love.
Oh, they're terrible. Their current uniforms are some of the worst in the league.
I've never seen a green bird.
What?
Seahawk, I've never seen a green bird. So I kind of like the blue.
Have you seen a blue Seahawk?
No, but I've seen like bluebirds.
Oh, okay. Because those are the same things. Yeah, I've seen a yellow bird on Sesame Street every morning.
If they wanted to go yellow, I could get behind it.
No.
I like these.
It looks too much like
uniforms.
the Bills.
What? I don't think so at all.
Yeah, I'm out on
These
these.
don't look at all like the Bills.
Yeah,
they do.
What are you talking about?
Yeah, they do. I'm
What
out.
the hell's wrong with
It
you?
looks stupid.
Okay.
I don't know if I'm in on them being the regular time uniforms, but I love these.
I think they should absolutely be the full-time uniforms. They're fantastic.
Yeah, well, you got bad taste in jersey colors.
Coming up next, 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Questions and answers here on 101 ESPN.
This weekend, the MLB plays on ESPN. One ESPN. You've got questions, we may have the answers. maybe. It's BK and Ferrario's questions and answers on 101 ESPN.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line for questions and answers. Let's start with this from the 314. Guys, is there any chance that this Cardinals team ends up making the playoffs? Alex, if you had to put a percentage on it, what would you say?
10%.
Sounds about right.
10 might be a little high, but I'd put it at 10 just because, again, the NL Central is so awful. And T-Bone brought this up in the office. I can absolutely see like Milwaukee trading away Corbin Burns and things opening up a little bit more, but it's still 10%.
See, I would even go less than that. I think it's like 5%. Like I think they just don't have the pitching to do it. I think the pitching's in a hot streak right now. And I still believe they're going to sell off too many pieces to where it's going to be tough to, like, if they move Hicks, they move Stratton, they move maybe even Paul DeYoung. Like, there's just too much that they're going to be selling off, I think, to where they just don't have a realistic shot, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think 10% is right around the place that I would put the odds as well, Alex. I think you hit the nail on the head there. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. This one comes from the 618. Guys, what do you think about the Jets being on Hard Knocks? Is that something that's going to be interesting to you?
It definitely has the personnel to be interesting, but you're going to have the actual content be interesting. And, like, it's pretty known that the Jets didn't want to be a part of Hard Knocks, so I can absolutely find it, like, where they find a way to make it as boring as possible. So, I mean, the storylines are there with Aaron Rodgers, and you had a couple of the contract situations with some of the defensive players, and you got some returning players like Breece Hall, and you got new faces. It's definitely got the makings of being entertaining, but it just comes down to how they portray it.
Yeah, I think they're an entertaining team to follow because you're going to have, like, all those storylines that you just mentioned. So I typically don't watch Hard Knocks because I just don't find it as exciting with the preseason and stuff going on. But with, like, the Jets and them having the pressure of, hey, you got to win because you got 2 years with Rodgers, and I know Rodgers is a character, so seeing him kind of behind the scenes is something that I really want to see. So I'm definitely excited to see the Jets on Hard Knocks this season.
I think it'll be good. I don't think it'll be great. I wish that it was going to be better than it is likely to be. Just because, like, I kind of agree with Alex. Again, this is rare. I don't think they want to be on it. And I think they have the right of first refusal, essentially, in order to basically decline whatever it is that they don't want to see in the show. So I wish it was going to be really good. I think it had the opportunity to be really good. I don't think it's actually going to be all that great. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line from the 314. Guys, what do you think it would take to re-sign Jordan Montgomery? It feels strange to let a solid number 3 leave when he wants to be here. I wouldn't think it would be a lot more than Miles Michaelis, but what do you guys think the price would be? Alex, I just looked on Baseball Reference. They do something called similarity scores, which is basically what it sounds like. Who are the most similar players to the player that I'm looking at right now? And for Jordan Montgomery, the most similar pitcher in Major League Baseball is Pablo Lopez. Now, Pablo Lopez is not an easy one-for-one comparison because he did have arbitration remaining, but his contract that he signed with the Twins after being traded there was a 4-year deal worth $73 million. I think what you're looking at is probably somewhere around that 4 to 5 year range and around $20 to $25 million per year for Jordan Montgomery.
Yep. When you brought it up, 5 by 25 seems about right because being a Scott Boras client, you're probably going to squeeze the most money out of whatever you need to. And if you're Jordan Montgomery and you pitch like this the rest of this season and you pitched like this in St. Louis for half of a season, yeah, a 5 by 25 I think is probably the sweet spot for Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, I was looking right around like 4 to 5 years and right around that 20 to 25 million. I think that's what it's going to be. That's why, like, if the Cardinals kept him, the qualifying offer it'll be interesting to see because
20,
I think it'll be right around 20 mil. So, but the thing is like, if you can get that for 4 or 5 years, why would you accept the qualifying offer?
Especially with taking a risk of getting injured if you're a starting pitcher. So, and look, I mean, if you're going to go to the market and have to sign a 1 and a 2, I mean, welcome to the neighborhood of what you're going to be paying for either of those guys. Probably north if it's a bidding war for a number 1. But, I mean, to Jordan Montgomery's credit, he's pitched like a number 2. And 4 by 20, 5 by 25, that's probably the going rate if you're going to want to sign those guys in free agency.
I can't remember if I asked this yesterday. I think it was a different comparison, but would you rather have Montgomery or Giolito?
Ooh, that's a good one. I think I would. How old's Montgomery? Is he 30?
Yeah, it'll be 30.
Probably Giolito then, just because of the age, if I'm talking about the same price range.
It's 1 year difference. It's 1 year difference. Giolito's a righty. I don't know if that plays into this at all. I don't know if you care.
Oh, well, that means the Cardinals are really
the Cardinals are going Montgomery then.
They love their lefties.
I would probably go Montgomery just because it's the familiarity. Like, he's already been here. He knows how it works. You don't have to get him acclimated and worry if it's going to take a little bit of time to get used to it, depending on who the catcher is. So I would say Montgomery if it's those two. I'd like both.
See, I think, and I think we're going to talk about this a little later on, I think I would probably take the side of Giolito, but it's not by like a whole lot. Like, I'm not saying like Giolito's far and beyond better than Montgomery, but I look at Giolito and I go, man, that guy's got really good stuff, swing and miss, and I still think he has the potential to become a number one. So I would probably take the side of Giolito here.
Over the last 3 years, Montgomery's been a decent bit better in terms of his overall results. But if you go a little further back than that, Giolito has the slightly better track record. So Giolito's been more consistent, and he does not have the same injury questions that it's been a minute now, but that Montgomery had at one point in his career. I think because of the upside, I would probably say Giolito, but I think it's really close, man. It's really close.
I think you're going to need both of them if you're not going to make a trade for something.
I think the ideal scenario is you get one of those guys and then you also lock up one of the number ones on the market. But let's be honest, the Cardinals are not likely to drop $60+ million into this rotation.
So instead, you could drop 45 to 50 mil for these two guys, right?
Yeah, but do you think they're going to do that?
Unless you're making...
Also, do you think that has enough upside? I guess that's the other question is like...
Oh, I think the upside's there. If Giolito, Montgomery, and Michaelis is my 1, 2, 3, I would be on board with that. And, I mean, look, you're going to have to pay that money if you're going to overhaul this pitching staff via free agency. That's what these guys are going to cost.
I wouldn't mind it. I wouldn't mind it. I think there's a case to be made there. I think it... For me, like, I would rather go get Blake Snell. I would rather go get the pitcher coming over from Japan. But if you end up with Montgomery and Giolito, I think the tough part, and this is where Cardinals fans will probably push back, is they'll say, why is that any different than having Jack Flaherty and Montgomery this year? And I would just say, I think that Giolito's a little better than Jack Flaherty, and certainly more consistent than Jack Flaherty.
Yeah, and I think... Yeah, there's still upside with Giolito that we just talked about, to where like he has the profile to where if it clicks, he becomes a number one. And though Jack had shown that in the past, I just don't know if he can get back to that level because of his injury history.
Someone texted in and said, how would you feel about Nola or Snell, Gilbert, Michaelis, Montgomery, and Matz? I'd love that, but that's like
money.
Yeah, that's like a $300 million rotation right there.
Open
Nola's
up
going
the
to
wallet.
get $30 million or Snell. Like, one of those two is going to get 30. And then you're talking $20 million for Montgomery. You're paying 20 already for Michaelis, $10 million for Matz, and then Gilbert's going to make 5 to 10. And then by the end of that deal, he's going to be closer to 20 to 25. They're just not investing that kind of money into the rotation. It's just not going to happen.
Sounds like excuses to me.
Coming up in 15 minutes, it's T-Bone's favorite segment of the week, a game of Believe It or Not. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line to get your Believe It or Not scenario in. But coming up next, the Yankees very well might be a one-stop shop for the Cardinals. Do they have the pitchers that intrigue you, though? Their minor leaguers don't for me. I'll tell you one major leaguer that does. I'll tell you who that is next year on 101 ESPN.
ESPN is everywhere, wherever you go. Nissan, home of the lifetime warranty and 30-day return. We're right back to more of it. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. So most of the day today we've spent talking about, okay, what is the upside play for the Cardinals, right? They've won 5 in a row, 8 of their last 10 games. What if, let's dream for a moment, the Cardinals actually get back into this thing? All right, now for a moment, let's drop back to reality, where the Cardinals are very likely going to be sellers at the trade deadline. That means sending off Jack Flaherty, Jordan Montgomery, Jordan Hicks, Paul DeJong, Tyler O'Neill, probably one other outfielder, and we don't have to discuss who we prefer in that discussion right now, but there's likely going to be one other outfielder, whether it's Donovan or Nootbaar or Burleson or Carlson, that ends up going elsewhere. Alex, the Yankees feel like a potential one-stop shop for the Cardinals. It reminds me a bit of how it felt with the Rangers and the Toronto Maple Leafs last year for St. Louis with the Blues, where it was like, okay, you could send multiple centers up to Toronto. You could send a winger and a defenseman. And at one point, I think it was multiple wingers that could end up going to the Rangers. That's where the Yankees are at right now. They need an outfielder that is good defensively and provide some offense for them. They need a legitimate starting pitcher. And honestly, they could use another guy at the back end of their bullpen as well. So there could be some kind of a package that looks like one of your outfielders plus Jack Flaherty plus Jordan Hicks going to the Yankees, and you could get a really good return because of that. You could get a guy or two that end up becoming similar to the return that we saw last year for Tyler Mahle, where the Reds ended up getting multiple prospects back that are helping them this year to compete. Here's the problem, Alex. I think this is the hang-up for me with the Yankees. When I look at their young pitching, and they've got a lot of it down in the minor leagues right now, names that you'll hear include the likes of Will Warren and Richard Fitz, Randy Vasquez, Matt Sauer, Chase Hampton, Clayton Beater. You're going to hear all of those names and many more over as we get closer and closer to the trade deadline from the Yankees. Very few of them look to be finished products. Most of them are going to be kind of like Matthew Liberatore, not in terms of what their upside is, but based upon the fact that it's going to take them time to adjust to the big leagues. Most of them are guys that'll probably be number 5 starters with some upside for you next year. When you hear those names, Alex, is that what you would want to be targeting? That young pitching in return for guys like Flaherty, Hicks, and then maybe one of your outfielders?
Yeah, the outfielders is a part where I would, unless it's Tyler O'Neill, like Dylan Carlson, I think the return probably should be a little bit better because of the amount of control. But these other guys that are pending free agents, it's kind of what I assumed you're going to get in return. Like for T-Bone and I, we talked about him last week. Clayton Beater is the name that has come up that I think I'm most intrigued by the Yankees. But none of it really matters if you just go through this list of players that you put out there. You're talking about a guy between the age of 23 and 24 who's had AA, AAA time, has not seen the big leagues yet, maybe getting there next year, but more than likely 2 years before he's contributing. But that's what I expect in a return for a pending free agent that, frankly, has had a average season. Like Jordan Montgomery, I would expect the return to be a little bit more significant, but if you're packaging things together, I would want multiple guys. If I'm putting 2 guys in a trade, let's say Flaherty and Hicks, and actually let's throw in O'Neill, I'm not expecting to get one of these guys back. I'm probably expecting it to get 2 or 3 of these guys back in return, but that's kind of the area that I just assumed because these guys, they don't have much stock on the trade market at a deadline when you only get them for a couple of months.
Yeah, I think when you're the Cardinals and you're looking at, if you're looking at the New York Yankees and having conversations with them, your goal should be to get like 2 of those starting pitchers that are in the minor leagues for them. And I agree with BK. They're not going to be up here, and they're not going to be guys that like you should expect 200 innings out of next year, or even 150 almost seems like
a depth.
Yeah, it's more depth and more of like fill out with a high upside number 5. Like one of these names, Will Warren, the one of these kids that's connected to St. Louis. some of these guys scream right now early on what that Cabrera kid was that you just saw from Edward Cabrera from the Miami Marlins, where they probably are going to walk the world and they're probably going to have a bunch of strikeouts and they're not going to go deep into games until they start to mature and develop at the big league level. Like, that's who they kind of remind me of. Perfect number 5 starter that can go like 5 innings, 5 and dive. He's probably going to have some command issues because he's learning at the big league level, but he's going to have like a 97-mile-an-hour fastball, great breaking stuff, and can get some swing and miss. And that's okay. That's like the kind of guy they should be targeting for that number 5 spot. They're not going to go out and acquire one of these kids and just say, all right, we've got Warren, he's going to be our ace for next season. No, that's
right.
You would hope he can develop into something better than a 5, but like the plan would be, okay, let's bring him in, we'll work with him, have him start as a 5, even potentially start in AAA as like that 6th starter for us, and just help to develop this kid and hope that he can be the guy, and hopefully be the guy that we look back on in this trade and say, we won the deal because we got our next number 3.
When you're trading away free agents like the Blues did, you're not going to be getting much in return, but you go with the highest upside possible, which is why the Cardinals need to be packaging guys together so that they can get the best return from a team like the Yankees.
Yeah, I guess my concern is this. I'm not sure any of these guys in the Yankee system projects to be better than a 4 or 5 starter. Like, they could. It's possible, but I think right now your expectation is pretty similar from these guys to what you have right now with, like, a Gordon Graceffo, and I don't know that that's what I would be targeting in these kinds of returns. If you're going to go with future value for your rentals, like Hicks or Montgomery or Flaherty, I think I would rather go for upside with lower level pitching prospects that have better potential. If you're looking for something from the Yankees, guys, I think I found my preferred outcome. Have you heard of Clark Schmidt?
A little bit.
You familiar?
Nope.
I've like recognized the name.
I just pulled up his Baseball Savant page, and I'm seeing a lot of blue, BK.
He is kind of a... I'm trying to think of the best comparison for him because it's not a high upside play. If you're getting a Clark Schmidt back, he's locked into like a 3-4 starter. That's who he is for you. But I'm pretty sure that he's going to be a 3 or a 4 starter for you right now. He is in the Yankees rotation currently. He's made 20 starts for them so far this year. He's done so to the tune of a 4.3 ERA, which is perfectly adequate. It'd be like mid-tier for your rotation right now. He's thrown 95 innings so far this year. He's not expected to hit some sort of an innings cap. So next year, if you traded for Clark Schmidt, who, by the way, strikes out a batter per inning, does not have any walk issues to speak of, he's just a really solid middle of the rotation starter. Has great spin rates on both his fastball and his curveball. Doesn't have a ton of velocity, but has pretty good command on all of his stuff as well. If you traded for this kind of a guy, you are getting in return a guy that you put into your rotation right now, and you have him there with 4 years of club control. The reason why I like approaching somebody like that, 27 years old, already a pretty established big league starter, is because you can put that guy into your 3-4 spot next year, and you've got 3, 4, 5 locked up money-wise for about $20 or $35 million. You've got Schmidt, Michaelis, and Matz ready to go for you at the back end of your rotation. And now you can fill out the top end with the money. That's where you spend. How do you guys feel about that kind of a plan by bringing in, whether it's Clark Schmidt or somebody similar, in return for one of the pitchers that you're letting go of?
I think that's the most ideal route for you. Somebody that you're slotting into one of those bottom spots in your rotation, so you're not spending the money in free agency. That's probably going to be $10 to $12 million to bring in somebody who you put in that spot, and you're going with projection, and you're going with upside. That's the most ideal outcome. You just got to target the right guy, because it's got to be somebody who will be in your rotation, but you're expecting more out of for next year, rather than somebody who could be in your rotation and expecting a lot out of. Because if there's one thing I doubt with this Cardinals team, it's developing untapped potential out of a young pitcher.
Yeah, see, I don't mind the idea of a Clark Schmidt like for a Dylan Carlson. Like that feels like an ideal like move for the St. Louis Cardinals. And I like the idea of, okay, figure out someone that can come in on a very decent deal that's pretty cost control for St. Louis, to where they don't have to rely on someone that doesn't have even big league experience like what's in your system in Graceffo or McGreevy going into next year as the 5. Because, like you said, Schmidt kind of profiles perfectly as your 4 with Matz as your 5, Michaelis as your 3, and then you can spend that big money, and you also add some level of certainty to the rotation by acquiring him. So I don't mind the deal at all because I think he's a solid pitcher that would come in and, I mean, he would be like your third best pitcher right now. So yeah. I think he's the perfect guy to kind of be looking at and targeting. And I know like when people look at like his ERA and some of his numbers, they go, ooh, I don't know about this guy. 2% below league average in terms of ERA plus. Like, I wouldn't worry about that. I think he's a guy that is what you're looking for. Profiles perfectly, solid mid-rotation guy that comes in, and maybe the most important part of all of it, he's on a cost control deal, and you can at least pencil in what you expect from him, unlike most of the guys in your minor league system where you can go, all right, we think we get this, but you don't know from a kid. This guy, you've got an idea of what he can do.
And that's the thing, man. Like, okay, so people are already saying, I don't want this guy. He's not somebody that I would be interested in. And that I guess to a degree I understand it. But like, man, okay, so Will Warren is a name that we're hearing a lot about, right? He's a 24-year-old right-handed pitcher for the Yankees. He spent this year at AA and AAA. He's got a big-time arm, big-time slider. Command's been a massive issue for him, though.
Oh, that's perfect.
He's thrown 67 innings this year and has a 4.7 ERA at AAA. He has basically the same strikeout numbers at AAA as what Clark Schmidt has this year at the major league level pitching in the American League East. He has a worse ERA at AAA than what you're seeing from Schmidt this year in the major leagues. And that is why, like, I understand what the upside can be for some of these young arms. We also have to take into consideration the downside. Will Warren might never be a consistent major league starter. That is very much in the range of outcomes for him, where he ends up, maybe he's just a reliever, or maybe he never ends up being a good major league pitcher at all. I know what Clark Schmidt is. Clark Schmidt can come in tomorrow and be a number 3 or 4 starter for the Cardinals for a contending rotation. We also got this from the text line. Guys, I understand that this guy might make sense for the Cardinals, but why would the Yankees trade him? Because they need other things. It's the same reason why the Cardinals would even consider trading Dylan Carlson. Like, I think a trade that makes some sense for the Cardinals and for the Yankees would be something like Dylan Carlson, Jack Flaherty, and Jordan Hicks all going to the Yankees, and in return, the Cardinals get Clark Schmidt, the 27-year-old right-handed pitcher that has a 4.3 ERA and 20 starts this year for the Yankees, and one of their young pitchers. I think that is something that would make a lot of sense for both sides.
Yeah, I agree. Because I do like the idea of acquiring one of those young arms just for what you talked about, upside. And sure. I think that if you feel confident in evaluating the pitcher and saying, okay, we can bring him into our system and work with him and get him to be a major league pitcher, then yeah, okay, I'm okay with that. And I also don't mind developing your own another cost control, whether it's upsides as a 4 or as a number 1, which I don't think any of these guys are, but I like having that cost control with these guys, and Schmidt gets closer to arbitration, and whether it be next year or 2 years from now. But I like getting someone that has certainty at the big league level, and I also like the idea of acquiring someone with upside that you can potentially kind of project forward into your rotation when you look at that. And you get that for 2 rentals and a guy of control that just doesn't have a role with your team. Like, I like that scenario, and I think that's what they're going to be looking at this deadline.
My question to people that are not excited about that is, what's going to get you excited? Because you're probably not going to be able to acquire it just with pending free agents at the deadline. Nobody that's going to be available is going to be overwhelming to you because you're not getting a top 100 prospect for Jack Flaherty. You're just not.
And even if you were, like, some of these guys are on the cusp of being, like Clayton Beeter, for example, is a top 100 prospect. You're going to have to give up Jack and Carlson for him. Yeah. And there's no guarantee that he ends up being a really good major league starter either.
Yeah, wasn't Liberatore a top 100 prospect?
Liberatore is a top 100 prospect, yeah. So that's the thing, is like, you never know with these guys. And that's not to suggest that they will always fail, because they don't. You may end up hitting it right and you get, the next Jack Flaherty when Jack was really good, where he's a little underrated throughout the minor league system, and then, whoa, who is this guy? Or Brendan Donovan on the pitching side, right? Maybe you trade for Will Warren, it's like, wait, why were people not higher on him? He should have been in the Yankees rotation this year. It's possible that you get your Randy Arozarena on the pitching side of things. It's also very much more likely that you end up with the next Matthew Liberatore. So I would trade for certainty, because that's what the Cardinals are missing right now. And if you got a Clark Schmidt, for example, I think you might end up even getting better. Like, you may get the better end of that deal for the rest of this season and for next year. But people that are mad at me for trading Dylan Carlson, I think that's probably the type of cost that you're going to be giving up. I think Carlson is exactly the type of player that would have to go in any kind of a deal where you're getting a Clark Schmidt in return. And that's the case for the Yankees, and it's also the case for other teams around Major League Baseball that have MLB-ready pitching that can come in next year and be penciled in for 150 or more innings. You're going to have to give up a whole heck of a lot. And the outfield that you have currently, Donovan, Nootbaar, Carlson, one of those three guys is probably going to have to be the return if you're going to get one of those types of players in return. Coming up next, let's play a game of Believe It or Not. 314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line here on 101 ESPN.
Grout 2023 with Night Ranger, Jefferson Starship, and more on July 28th at Hollywood Casino Amphitheater. Tickets for the show are on sale now. Get all the details and get entered to win those free tickets for Party Gras with Brett Michaels now at either 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app.
is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield.
Edition of Believe It or Not.
You get Believe It or Not.
Sunny out, man.
Oh.
Here on 101 ESPN. If you haven't checked it out yet, you can watch us on YouTube at 101 ESPN STL. Go ahead and bookmark that page. Subscribe to the channel. Like it. Do everything you can. Share it with your friends. It's a great way to be able to listen and watch our show on a day-to-day basis. All right, guys, let's get to Believe It or Not. I like this one. Let's start here. Guys, believe it or not, Cardinals fans are going to be underwhelmed by the returns that we get for our starting pitching, even though they probably shouldn't be.
This is the most easiest believe it or not we've ever done on this show. Believe it. They're going to be underwhelmed because the name is not going to be a recognizable one if it's just solely selling. Now, if there's a buy and sell situation, then I think they're going to be fine with it. But if it's just the, hey, we're getting younger pitchers back, they're going to be underwhelmed because none of them are going to be name recognizable.
I've never seen Cardinals Nation be disappointed in a Mo move. Of course I'm going to believe this.
They loved John Lester.
Mo could get Ohtani and they think he gave up too much.
That's a good point.
I'm going to believe this. I would be stunned if I don't see text the day after the deadline and people aren't upset about whatever it is that Mo ends up doing. So
I think the one that's going to be the most frustrating for Cardinals fans is what they're able to get for Dylan Carlson.
Oh, see, I was going to say Montgomery.
Oh,
I could see that.
I think Cardinals fans understand that with, maybe I'm overestimating here, but guys like Montgomery and Flaherty, like the return might end up being okay, but for rentals, it's just never as much as what you would hope for. Dylan Carlson's a guy that has multiple years remaining of club control. There was the comment a few years ago about how you would have to pry him from Mo's cold, dead hands. And then last year, everybody brings up, even though it's unfair, the fact that the Cardinals decided that they weren't willing to trade him for Juan Soto. Go ahead and editor's note here. They also didn't want to include Mason Wynn, Tink Hintz, or Jordan Walker in that deal, and that was the bigger part of it, but neither here nor there. So if they end up trading, like, a trade of Dylan Carlson for Clark Schmidt straight up would probably be pretty fair on both sides. But I think Cardinals fans would take that and say, hold on, we got a number 3 or 4 starter for Dylan Carlson. That was the return. And I think that's where fans would get pretty frustrated.
I was trying to pull up what the trade simulator says in terms of Dylan Carlson and Clark Schmidt.
It actually says that Schmidt is more valuable.
Oh, look at BK over here.
I wonder why Cardinals fans hate that. That's baseball trade simulator.
BKO effect. All right, boys, believe it or not, the Cardinals starting 9 next season were all Cardinals in 2023.
Not believing it. I think they're going to sign a center fielder this year.
You don't think it's going to be Tommy Edman?
No.
I'm trying to run through my opening day lineup.
Game.
Does like, I guess Wynn counts as being a Cardinal, right?
Yeah, a Cardinal currently. Basically, nobody in your starting 9 next year is from an outside organization.
Yeah. I'm not going to believe it either. I tend to agree with BK. I think they're going to have to look at the center field market. Now, granted, that market kind of stinks in free agency.
Yeah, it does.
But I think they're going to have to add a center fielder. I don't know if you can look at Edman as being their guy.
They should just go ahead and sign Kevin Kiermaier.
See, I'm going to believe this one because the Cardinals are going to say, well, it was too costly for us to get a center fielder because we spent all the money on pitching. And by all the money, it's going to be like $30 million on 2 guys in the middle of your rotation. But that's where all the money went. And they're going to say, oh, no, Tommy Edman is a great center fielder. And that's what our starting 9 looks like. So I'll believe in this one.
3-1-4.
Oh, believe it or not, I'm going to go something kind of similar to his. believe it or not, we will see 3 new faces from outside the Cardinals organization in the bullpen come next year.
In the bullpen?
Oh, believe
that.
Believe it.
Yeah. I think you're only going to have, I would say, because it's 8 bullpen arms? I'm going to say you have 3 guys that are in your bullpen next year that are on this team currently.
Oh.
Helsley, Gallegos, and then Zach Thompson.
See, I could see them like running it back, and again, it would be a bad move.
Run this back,
but it would be not so much like with this specific bullpen, but they could come back with like Helsley,
re-sign Verhagen.
Oh gosh, you have Helsley. You come back with Thompson as a bullpen arm if they finally figure it out. Gallegos, JoJo. And then you hope for like Zuniga or Rodriguez to be healthy, if not both. I mean, right there, you're up to 6 arms already.
Rodriguez, the biggest reason this team couldn't win this year.
Amen. And the big thing, too, is like most of those names that I just said outside of Gio and Helsley, I think those are the only 2, are guys that can ride that shuttle bus to Memphis and back, and then you can go and sign like 2 veterans rather than 3, 4, 5, 6, however many it is.
By the way, I think a guy that we don't talk enough about as a trade candidate is Giovanni Gallegos.
Agreed.
If you want to get a real return for a reliever, Gio having 2 more years of club control at, I think it's like $10 million. That is somebody that I think would have real value on the trade market. And if I'm the Cardinals, if they decide to go full sell mode, he's a guy that I would absolutely be trading at this year's deadline. Like including him with Hicks in a deal, for example, I think could get you a big time return. Or maybe in one deal, you have Hicks and Flaherty, and in the other one, it's Gallegos with Montgomery. Like, you could help the middle of a rotation and the back end of a bullpen for multiple teams. That's where you start massively increasing what the return can be. And instead of getting quantity, so a high number of prospects in return, now you're starting to talk about getting quality in return.
I wonder if Gallegos could be a piece if you're going to try and be aggressive and go get Logan Gilbert. I mean, he would have to be a package of a lot of different things, but because there's control there, I wonder if Seattle would be intrigued in that.
Maybe. I mean, I don't know what they're going to be looking for in return for Gilbert. I think they're going to be looking for a lot. That's where we start talking about Nootbaar, Donovan, Gorman, guys like that.
Yeah.
314-399-9646 is the Air Comfort Service text line. Guys, believe it or not, the Cardinals win at least 8 of their next 11 games.
Not. I totally, we were talking about this, I think during a commercial break. I think it was after our first segment, actually. Right before we decided to, like, throw on our smiles and pretend everything was fine.
Sunshine, lollipops, and rainbow.
But I could totally see where, like, they've built this momentum, and now they're like, hey, look, we can convince Mo. And then they just lay an egg in Chicago. Like, they have struggled historically in Chicago, and it's a tough place to play, even when the Cubs are bad. I could see them dropping 3 or 4 against the Cubs and that being like the final kick in the cojones, and then they go, oh, man, we didn't do it. And then they get swept by Arizona, and all of a sudden you're looking at it going, yeah, we're clearly sellers.
Yeah, this series, to me, it screams the gut punch to where the Cardinals are riding this high of like, oh, man, look what we just did. We just swept the Marlins and that pitching staff. We got the Cubs now. You lose the first game in the series, and it's like just a right hook to your gut, and it's like, oh, wait, no. So we're not that good. And then you fall back to reality. So, yeah, I'm not going to believe this one.
Final thing here, guys.
Well, you going to skip over it, BK? You don't want to be negative, too?
I mean, I'm not believing this. Come on, let's be honest. let's not be ridiculous. Guys, believe it or not, by the end of the season, Nolan Arenado will be back in the MVP conversation.
I'll believe this one because I don't feel like there's somebody running away with it. Oh, unless I'm forgetting somebody.
Acuna.
Yeah, but I feel like that. Well, maybe. I mean, I guess, but it doesn't feel like it's clear cut. He's winning it. If that makes sense.
Acuna?
I think he's totally winning it.
Really?
This dude could I don't remember what he was on pace for, but like at the All-Star break, he was on pace for I don't remember, 40 steals and 50 bombs, or the other way around.
He has 45 stolen bases now.
And then it was like 60 or 70 stolen bases.
Don't scream MVP.
He's
guys.
on pace for 40 home runs and 65 65 bases.
Yeah.
That's never been done before.
That's an
He's
MVP.
winning the MVP.
Oh yeah, sorry, Nolan, not happening. He'll be in the conversation though.
Oh, see, I'm not going to believe it because I think he's going to get hurt by being on a bad team, and I think that kills a lot of guys. Like when Arenado has a great year in Colorado, people forgot about it sometimes because one, he was in Colorado, but two, he was on a bad team. So
I think your top 3 is set. By the way, I think it's Mookie, and Freddie Freeman as 2-3, and then it becomes a question of like who fills it out from there. And I think if you want to have a conversation about Nolan maybe working his way into like the top 5 MVP mix, I think we could see that. But him getting into the top 3, I think would be nearly impossible. Acuna, Betts, and Freeman to me are the clear-cut top 3 players in the National League.
Congrats on being negative, guys. I want to say he's going to be in the top 3 by the end of the season.
All right, I like it. He's Alex Ferrario. He's the forever optimist here on this show. That's what we like to call him, especially as it relates to the St. Louis Cardinals. That's Tanner Hendrickson. I am Brandon Kiley. Coming up next, guys, ESPN put out an article earlier today on the top free agents in the NHL in 2024. There are some big-time stars that are expected to hit the market, and I think it's put some pressure on one Blues player in particular to have a big 2023 season. I'll tell you who that is next here on 101 ESPN.
Coverage of 101 ESPN is presented. on 101 ESPN today. Get caught up with all the shows and 101 podcasts at 101ESPN.com or on your 101 mobile app.
Driven by Dobbs Tire and Auto Centers.
101 ESPN Sports Center.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update, driven by Johnny Londoff Chevrolet and Johnny Londoff Autoplex. Cardinals took down the Marlins yesterday 6-4 as they've won 5 in a row, and they start a 4-game set in Chicago against the Cubbies tonight. 7:05 will be first pitch as Steven Matz takes them out for St. Louis, and Marcus Stroman will get the start for the Cubs. This Sports Center update was driven by Johnny Londoff. Find your road shop 24/7 at londoff.com, londoffautoPlex.com. Are you kidding me?
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. So it's that time of the year, Alex. It's the slow time in the NHL, the quiet before the storm, so to speak. And so what we're seeing is a lot of people doing lists, right? The best players in the NHL. And Greg Wyshynski jumped in that bandwagon this morning by writing about the free agency list for 2024. The best free agents that are going to hit the market next year, the guys that are going into their walk years for their respective teams. Alex, we know this season, and this was the case even dating back to last year where we were looking at the projected 2023 free agents, it was always going to be a bad group. There just, for whatever reason, was not a good group of players that were hitting the market this offseason. And for the most part, Doug Armstrong stayed out of it. He decided it's not the year for us to really wade into those waters for a number of different reasons. Most importantly, it wasn't a good group of players, but also they didn't have a ton of cap space, and this is not a year where they're trying to go all in. Next year is different. Alex, there is one position in particular where next year is remarkably strong, and that's in the forward group, but more specifically, the center position. You look at it, Austin Matthews, Sebastian Aho, Elias Lindholm, Mark Scheifele, Chandler Stevenson, and there are many others. They're all coming up in free agency next year. And the reason why I find this interesting for the Blues is because I think this is a really big season for Robert Thomas to prove exactly what he is as a player. I thought in 21-22, he looked like he was ready to make that jump into being a legit number one center for a contending team. And I thought last year, well, not a bad season. I thought he was fine. He did not look like a number one centerman. He looked like a number two, a guy that was more comfortable going up against the second best line for the opposition than going up on a night in, night out basis against the top line from the opposing team. If he looks that same way this year, I think next year there's going to be conversations from us and from the Blues about, do we need to go sign one of those top tier centers to take some of that pressure off of Robert Thomas, to be able to make us a legitimate contender? Because if you look at the list of teams that have won Stanley Cups in recent years, it looks like a whole lot of teams that have legitimate number one centermen.
Yeah, the tough part with that, though, is you've locked yourself in with other centermen for the next 3 years at minimum. You've got Kevin Hayes now until the end of the 25-26 season, and then, of course, you've got Braden Shen for... I'm
not locked into Braden Shen as a center, though.
No, you're not, but it's pretty evident that they don't see him as a winger. They only see him as a centerman. But to the point that you're making, I don't know if it just has to be a centerman. Whereas if Robert Thomas looks like he's still he's not captured that what they're hoping from him as the number one centerman, I could see them being very aggressive and going out there and bringing in another winger to supplement that top six. And this is the part that you just don't know, because you frankly can't do any of this until you figure out your defense, and that's going to have to be their first draw. But the reason that Doug Armstrong was so adamant about not diving into the free agent market this year was because it was so bad, and of course his team really needed to figure who they were out first. That's why, to me, it's dire for this team to make the playoffs this season, because if they don't, then you're still trying to get this cycle going. Think back to the Blues, where they got into the playoffs, but then they just couldn't figure out how to get it done. They finally got over the hump against the Blackhawks, and then we all know what kind of took place after that. That's what this season could be in the eyes of Doug Armstrong. And the one I always go to when you're not aggressive in free agency and then you become aggressive in free agency when you know your team's ready to go are the Chicago Blackhawks. Chicago was awful for 5 straight seasons. We all know they drafted Taves, they drafted Kane. They got their cornerstone players. And then in the 2008-2009 season, they finally showed that they were ready to take that next step. They won in their first round of the playoffs, and then they lost in the next round. And that offseason, they went out and they went big after Marian Hossa, because Marian Hossa would get them over the hump. Then they started that franchise that they kind of went on to win those cups. I could see the Blues being that next offseason with all of these names, because Sebastian Aho is an incredible centerman, can also be a goal scorer for you. I mean, you look at a Mark Scheifele, big centerman, you could use him as a winger. You said William Nylander's name. Maybe that doesn't get done. The playoffs are important because then the Blues can take that next step and be aggressive in free agency and make their team even more competitive.
The other thing that I would add, and Alex, I think this goes back to like specifically why I would be targeting a center. Like when you look at what the Blues have internally right now, tell me if you think all of these guys will be here 2 years from now. All right, let's go one by one real quickly, okay? Buchnevich.
Yes.
Shin.
Yes.
Kyrou.
Yes.
Snugerud.
Yes.
Saad.
I would say yes, but his trade's no modified. So if they want to move on and these younger guys take the next step, I'd put that 50-50.
Bolduc.
No.
2 years from now?
I think he's going to be a part of a trade.
Okay. Kevin Hayes.
I would say yes.
Thomas.
Yes.
That is 8 of your top 9 potentially, and I didn't mention Neighbors. So you could, if you want to do like Neighbors in the spot for either Bolduc or Saad, you could do that as well. They've got their cost-controlled players already ready to go internally.
Yeah, and you didn't even mention Dean's name too.
Exactly. If you wanted to go out there and make that move for a big-time center, it sounds crazy right now, but if you're able to remove one defenseman from the books, you can make it happen next year.
Yep.
This is the time where you can go do that. And so the reason why I'm focusing so much on Robert Thomas is because, man, it is rare to get these number one centermen to hit the market. And the Blues have that opportunity next offseason. So you brought up Sebastian Aho as the guy that is a stud. I totally agree with you. We also know Carolina is a team that will move on from players that you don't think they're going to be willing to, because they're going to have a number in mind. And if he is not willing to accept it, they're going to go a different direction. So if the Blues end up being able to get him, it might cost, $9 million per year, maybe even $10 million per year. But if you have found out that Robert Thomas is not that legit number one centerman based on his performance this year, next year is the year that you go out there and you get aggressive with it. You go get yourself a Sebastian Aho. You go get yourself one of these other top tier centermen, an Elias Lindholm, Mark Scheifele, Chandler Stevenson, one of those guys to come in and take that pressure off of him in future seasons.
Yeah, and the other thing with that too is Aho can play wing, and that's the versatility where I could see the Blues doing that, BK, to finding a guy who can be a centerman and then rotating Robert Thomas in and out with this player that they bring in and out. The other one that comes up for me that makes a lot of sense if he's a free agent that I could see them be aggressive with is a guy like Jake DeBrusk. But all of this relies on them finding a way to get out of one of those defenseman contracts, because you can't do anything, just like we just saw. Even if your cap rises $5 million, that $5 million is probably going to go to re-signing a Pavel Buchnevich. So you're before any
not
of
for
this,
next year though. Not for next year. Next year you're good. It'll be rising $10 million potentially by the time that Buch is up.
Right. Yes, but those $5 million you could bring in, but again, it's only $5 million, and you're going to have to move on from something.
You're moving on from Kasperi Kapanen at $3 million. You're moving on from Jakub Vrana for $3 million. You're moving on potentially from Marco Scandella for $3 million. That's basically $9 million between those three players. You're adding in another $5 million in expected money from the cap rising. We're now up to almost $15 million that the Blues have added to their cap situation. Cap Friendly has them at $17 million projected in cap room available next offseason. This is finally the year, 2024, when the Blues can get aggressive again. They will start having money that is flexible for them. And at that point in time, like Nick Leddy, for example, he's got a no-trade clause, so that does make things a little more difficult. But the final year of his deal is 2025, and that would be the first year of the new deal for Pavel Buchnevich potentially. So there continues to be a little bit more wiggle room there as well.
And I'll say this too. I mean, you don't have any RFAs that are coming up to have big contracts. So yeah, this window of opportunity.
And you've got the young players coming in. You've got Zachary Dean. You've got Snugerud. You've got Bolduc. You've got Neighbors, who's on a cost control deal. You've got Dvorsky coming up as well. You've got internal options, and that's why the draft picks hitting the way that they have recently is so important for this team, is because now you've got some of those cheaper guys that you can count upon for those bottom 6 roles, and now you can go out there and pay significant sums of money for a guy that can potentially help you into the top 6.
And that's why I don't believe Brandon Saad will be here. His no trade clause goes to a 12-team list his final year, so I would say in 2 years, you're talking about potentially moving him out, because these younger guys are ready to step into that role, which opens up $4.5 million that you're able to allocate there. It would not surprise me next season if they are big players in that free agent market. But again, you've got to figure out how to make your defense better before you can worry about adding more offense.
Exactly. And I think that one of the reasons why I find this to be so interesting, Alex, is because what I'm talking about is helping your defense.
Yeah.
I'm talking about adding a number 1 centerman like a Sebastian Aho or an Elias Lindholm, both of whom are really good defensive forwards. So if you're able to go out and make a move like this, and the only way it's necessary is if Robert Thomas does not take that step. If he takes the step that we're talking about, now next offseason, maybe you can reallocate that money elsewhere. Maybe you can go make a big trade on the market, or you can go get a DeBrusque or somebody like that just helps your middle 6 forwards. You can get a little more creative, or there's a little bit more movement that you can have. If Thomas doesn't take that next step, I think one of the biggest needs that this team will have in order to compete at a Stanley Cup level is going out there and getting a number 1 centerman. They're hard to find. Next year, you've got about 5 of them that are potentially coming available on the free agent market, though. Coming up next, we're diving into the junk drawer here on 101 ESPN.
Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's open it up. The Junk Drawer with BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Fenton Bar and Grill. Best trashed wings in Missouri. Dine in, carry out, 7 days a week.
Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. It is time to dive into the junk drawer. And Alex, I think I have found a man that I am willing to celebrate, and I think you will join me in celebrating this individual.
Is it Luca? We already did, man.
Huh?
Is it Luca? We already did. Congrats.
No, we're all very proud of Luca. He's getting his newborn photos today in about the next 20 minutes or so. So if anybody hears a whole lot of ruckus going on in my house, I apologize. There's just nothing I can do about it.
Oh, the newborn pictures. Those are always entertaining.
So I will be joining him in about an hour, obviously.
Good.
All right, the man that I think that you will be willing to celebrate, Alex, is Arthur Walters Jr. He just celebrated his 104th birthday. 104. You know how he did it?
How?
He said he got this far without taking any medication. People always ask, quote, what do you attribute living this long to? And I always say I have two good friends, Jim Beam and Jack Daniels.
Yes, sir. That's a smart man. The only medication he needs is Jack and Jim.
I love it. 104 years old. Arthur Walter Jr. He was in the Air Force. He now has two good friends, as Alex said, Jim and Jack. I feel like we could maybe make some better choices here on which specific whiskeys we're going with, but that is neither here nor there. If the goal to living 104 years is drinking a whole heck of a lot of bourbon, I think this show right here is prepared to live long and healthy lives.
I would say so. Just for my 30th birthday alone, I had to have added at least 20 years onto my life.
Really?
That was a lot of Jack. A lot of Jack. You know, I like to picture myself as Arthur, where I'm 104 years old. I'm sitting in a lounge chair, probably in a white t-shirt and my boxers, not wanting to leave my house, and just sipping on some nice Jack. It's a smart way to go, man. Watching the Game Show Network.
Being in bed by 5.
Oh, my God. Are you kidding me? Eating dinner at 4?
Yeah.
Genius.
You already are definitely trending towards being Arthur.
My daughter's obsessed with the movie Up these days.
Oh, really?
And every time I watch it, I identify more with the main character, where he just hates everything and everyone. Like when he smashes the dude's head with his cane that hits his mailbox. Yeah, I could see myself doing that in 50 years.
Carl? You're Carl?
Sometimes I feel like Russell, but mostly Carl.
You're definitely not
Russell. I feel like you're missing something, though. Like, the whole movie is that Carl got that way for a reason. He wasn't that way before his wife passed.
Well, I'm not that way.
He's sad and he can't, spoiler alert, by the way. He's sad, doesn't know how to cope with the fact that his partner for his entire life is now gone. And as a result, he's become an old curmudgeon. Alex is just that way when he's 30.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I still have my wife. My wife makes me very happy. But when I'm away from her, that's when I become a curmudgeon. So maybe that's why I'm always upset.
Maybe. That does kind of...
I'm just going to say this. I don't know that that's true, because when you're in Alton, Illinois, you seem to have a great time.
Nah, I still get curmudgeon vibes.
Yeah. Tanner apparently thinks I'm angry all the time. I think Tanner just...
He had fun in Nashville, didn't he?
Tanner just complains all the time.
Whole time in
I
Nashville.
did not. Tanner likes to sit here and act like I whine 24/7. Did I whine in Alton?
Yes.
Other than not wanting to get stabbed, which, look, that's understandable.
So, last year more so than this year. This year, I think you embraced Alton for what it is.
No. I think he
You
whined a
also
lot.
didn't have to do a show
I was
for
gonna say,
the Blues this year.
Let's remember what I did last year. Last year, I finished my show and then sat there, and then we did Blues pre and post until about 11 o'clock at night. That doesn't sound like me wanting to party right afterwards.
Yeah, because you want to go to bed.
Exactly.
Well, see, that's
I did a lot of work that day.
Yeah.
Guys, can I give you another quick junk drawer story?
Yeah.
Did you guys see the news from the Seattle Mariners?
No.
No, what happened? Did they trade Logan Gilbert to the Blues or to the Cardinals?
Jared Kelenic, their outfielder that we saw earlier this season, that was awesome against the Cardinals, absolutely crushed them. He was just placed on the 10-day injured list with a left foot fracture. Do you know why he was placed on the 10-day injured list with a left foot fracture?
He was golfing and he thought he was kicking something that was not permanently into the ground.
No, but that would have been a better story. Jared Kelenic suffered a fractured foot by kicking the water cooler after he struck out last night.
How do you break your foot kicking a water cooler?
Full of water.
Well, I get it.
That is an all-time bad beat for the Seattle Mariners.
Worse injury, kicking a water cooler from striking out or tearing your ACL stepping out of a golf cart?
Oh, definitely
definitely the ACL.
Yeah.
Definitely the ACL.
Yeah.
It's up there, though.
That one can't happen. This one can't happen either, but I can, see frustrating. It's there. You kick it.
Which part?
Not stopping the golf cart and then tearing the ACL.
You're supposed to kick with the bottom of your foot, not the. Did he try and ninja kick it? Why wouldn't you push with your foot?
Kick with the bottom.
Yeah, when you kick with the
with the shoelaces.
No.
Yeah.
No.
Definitely don't do that if you're kicking a water cooler that is full.
You don't kick with the shoelaces. That's how you fracture your foot. You kick with the bottom part of your foot.
That's what he did. Is he probably played soccer in his background.
Somebody needs to learn how to kick.
Went laces first. Kept his knee up though. That way you don't get underneath it.
Yeah, didn't tear his ACL.
And then, boom, broken foot.
Another option, of course, is just not kicking a water cooler after you strike out in the ninth inning of a game.
Sometimes you got to kick, BK. Sometimes you got to kick.
Yeah.
Coming up next, we want to hear from you guys. The mic drop features on the 101 ESPN app. What would it take for you to buy back into the Cardinals prior to the deadline? And I'm talking about this as open-ended. Is it you need to see the defense playing the way that we all expected it to be? You need to see the bullpen stabilize. You need to see this offense score an average of 9 runs. Or maybe it's just they have to be at least within 5 games of the top of the division. You can take this in a million different directions. We'll give you our answers. We want to hear from you as well. What do you need to see from the Cardinals over their next 11 games to buy back in prior to the deadline? We'll tell you next year on 101 ESPN.
Stay up to date on the biggest sports stories in St. Louis with the
buying back into the Cardinals when it's 2024 and they've got a decent pitching staff. Till then, it's just smoke and mirrors.
That's one mic drop on the 101 ESPN app. Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. We want to hear from you on your mic drops. What do you need to see over the next 11 games in order to buy back in at the trade deadline? Or maybe you're like that gentleman and you have nothing that can be done prior to the deadline that can buy or get you to buy back in.
Ding, ding,
you
ding.
need to see it going into the offseason. I think that's a totally reasonable stance, Alex. I think that's actually a healthy stance. This team has shown you for 4 months that they are 10 games below 500 in terms of the quality of their roster. They have now played really well for their last 5 games, and they've won 8 of their last 10. So they've had a really nice stretch here of 10 games. Alex, what is it, if anything, that you need to see over the next 11 games for you to believe that they could potentially go on a run down the stretch?
I think I fall very close into the line of the mic drop individual. I don't think I can buy back in no matter what I see, because I only have 11 games prior to the trade deadline, and 11 games is not going to do enough for me to sit here and say, yeah, this team can go on a deep playoff run. And look, if you're out there listening and you hate that I say that and think that anything can happen, Alex, and I'm going to believe, please keep believing, because it creates the entertainment for the rest of the season. And if they go on a deep run, I'm going to be so happy about it. But I can't buy back in, because what I have seen all season long has a longer track record than what I'm seeing right now in 4 or 5 games. So I think I'm right in the same line of 2024 is when I'm ready to buy back in, when I see John Mozeliak accomplishing what he said he was going to accomplish.
Yeah, and I think for me, I think there's no chance for me to truly buy back in. I think I can convince myself, if they end up winning 8 of the next 11, 9 of the next 11, get within like 5 games, of not so much of a buy back into the team, but more so of, all right, let's kind of limit the fire sale. Let's kind of cut back on some of our selling and hold on to like a Montgomery. But I just can't get back on board of like, oh, here they come. Now they're going to go on a deep run. They can go on a playoff run potentially. I just can't convince myself at all of them being able to do that, but I can't convince myself of, okay, don't sell everybody, hang on to Montgomery. Maybe you either have to just stick with him out through the season, see if you get hot, make the playoffs, at least you have him in the rotation then, or at least then you have him for the rest of the year and you can try and work out a contract extension with him.
I've got a few things that I would need to see. Some of them are feel-based, some of them are numbers-based. The numbers-based things, get to within 5 games of the top of the division. That's going to be really hard to accomplish going into the trade deadline. But this is where you've put yourself, and it's going to be really hard for you to convince both us and the front office that they should buy. So you need to chop off 5 games from the lead right now that the Brewers have in a 10-game stretch. Whew, without playing head-to-head, that ain't going to be easy, but that is one thing that I need to see. Another thing, I need to see your defense playing the way that it has over the last 5 games. They've finally started to look like the defense that we expected them to be. And that really starts with Nolan Arenado. Nolan Arenado yesterday played one of the best games that I've seen from him all season long. Defensively, I thought that was the best game that we've seen from Nolan so far this year. When this pitching staff is at its best, it is because they are getting big-time plays from the defense. We've seen Newt make a couple. We've seen Dylan Carlson, credit where it's due, make a couple. And yesterday we saw on back-to-back plays, Nolan Arenado make a couple. That has to continue. Couple other quick things. Ryan Helsley's going to have to return sooner rather than later, hopefully right around that trade deadline, and he needs to be ready to go at the back end of my bullpen. Final thing, pitching-wise, I need Matz, Michaelis, and one other guy, probably Dakota Hudson, I can't believe I'm saying this, to step up and look like legitimate starters in a contending rotation.
How'd that feel to say?
I mean, this is what it's going to take, right? Like, I think right now Dakota Hudson has earned his opportunity again. He looked good enough, not great, but good enough yesterday that he can go out there and make another start because he gave you a chance. And that's all you need right now from your starting pitching. If they give you a chance You're going to be in these games. Matz has looked pretty good lately. Michaelis has looked really good lately. If you keep Montgomery on top of those two guys, you end up going out there, and whether you trade Flaherty or not, you add a guy like Clark Schmidt, who we talked about earlier today, and then you've got, maybe it is Hudson as that number 5. I don't think that's a World Series rotation, but it's enough that you could convince me that if they're 5 games back, maybe they can make a run and get into the playoffs. So that's what it would take. 5 games back, good defense, Helsley coming back, Matz, Michaelis, and probably Montgomery all looking good in your rotation with Hudson contributing. Those are my non-negotiables. T-Bone, where are you at on this?
Yeah, I agree with that list that you just put out there. I think when you look at the rotation, like, it's pitched better of late, but it's got to maintain that if they're going to go show any signs of buying into a run. And even then, it's such a small sample size that it's kind of even tough to still buy back into it. But I do like the list that you have. Defensively, that is one that is definitely the eye test one for me, because when they play good defense, the kind of pitch to contact, though it is kind of outdated at this point, they can take advantage of. I mean, you saw it yesterday. Arenado made 2 great, phenomenal plays in the field. We've seen the defense play a little bit better. So I think when you look at that, and Helsley's Helsley's the big key piece here, because even if they get somewhat close to this, like 5 games, I think was the number that you put on it in the division. If you get within 5 games, to me, you're still selling Hicks, because he's going to be such a hot commodity on the market. And you basically have what Hicks is now in Ryan Helsley, and you hold on to him, and he can just kind of fill that role. So I think that's a fair list, but even then, like, I still just don't think there's any chance to just fully buy back into this team. I think they're too far gone to completely buy back in no matter what they end up doing.
It's hard to buy back in when you're hoping for 5 or 6 things to happen that you haven't seen happen for a long stretch. You know what I mean? Like, to sit here and say to buy back in the defense, okay, yeah, I could get on board if the defense plays like they've played over the last couple of games. But what have we seen all season? We've seen the defense really struggle. And how does that work out going into the trade deadline? To sit here and say that I'll buy back in if Dakota Hudson pitches like a number 5, great. But I mean, look, I'm the biggest Dakota Hudson advocate. But if I get 3-4 weeks of Dakota Hudson pitching that well, do we buy back in that's going to help this team go on a deep run? That's the part that's so hard for me to look at and say I'm ready to buy back in, because I've seen stretches. And I understand the texter's point earlier. Baseball's all about hot streaks. That's how this goes. I get it. But stretches, to me, still make me concerned how far you get into it. And what would worry me is if you do start to buy back in and you look at this and you make some type of run, and then you get to the offseason of 2024 and say, hey, look how good our team was in the second half. We're a second half team. Some of these guys got the job done for us. Let's rely on them next year and not be aggressive in the offseason, because guess what you're going to do? The same thing that you did this year.
Yeah, that's not even, I don't even think that's a conversation. Like, even if they made the playoffs this year, you've got to overhaul this rotation and this pitching staff in general. I think the Cardinals know that. They've admitted as much. So no matter what happens from here on out, there is no buying back into this model for 2024. That is dead. It's gone. It's over. And I want to be clear here. I'm not buying back in just because Dakota Hudson pitches a little better. I would be at that point buying in, not to them as a World Series contender, but maybe they can make a run for a really bad division. That is all. Like, I think they could win 83 or 84 games, and maybe that's enough to win this division this year. That would be the quote-unquote goal. And that still, I think, would amount to you trading Jack Flaherty, Jordan Hicks, and Tyler O'Neill at the trade deadline. Really what we're talking about here is, what would it take for you to hold on to Montgomery or Carlson or some of these other ancillary parts that DeYoung that could be dealt at the deadline, or could be pieces that you want to continue to use down the stretch? That's really what this discussion is about. And so for me, I need to see him 5 games back. I need to see the defense improve. I need to see Helsley making his way back. And then I need to see, and again, Hudson is the last piece of this. I need to see Matz pitch well. I need to see Monty pitch well. I need to see Michaelis pitch well. And because they are in such dire need for a number 5 starter, I need to see Dakota Hudson perform as if he is a legitimate major league starting pitcher. All right, let's go back out to the mic drop feature. Let's hear from Nick. What does he need to see to buy back in prior to the deadline?
There's absolutely nothing that the Cardinals can do that would get me to buy back in this year. I'm with the original mic drop. I'm looking at 2024. even if they were somehow to go on a run and make the playoffs this year, good pitching always beats good hitting. And we've seen Arenado and Goldie get shut down in the playoffs, and they don't have enough pitching or good enough pitching to do anything in the playoffs against these other teams' lineups and their other teams' pitching rotations. Also, their pitch to contact, and we have a terrible defense this year, aside from like Goldie and Arenado. So what do you think they're going to do even if they make the playoffs? You have to look at 2024. There's no way you're going to be able to re-sign Flaherty, probably not Montgomery either because of Scott Boras. So you have to be getting ready for 2024.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to argue with that.
I was going to say, that's kind of where I am, too, is like, though you are, and I don't want to make it like sound like missing the playoffs is a good thing for the Cardinals, because I think the goal always is to be in the playoffs, and then you can talk about aspirations for a World Series. I think the thing, though, for them is I think it is time to realize that no matter what, you need to capitalize on the assets that you have, because you're in the top spot. I think we played a cut yesterday from Andy McCullough on the Athletic Baseball podcast saying the Cardinals are hold the keys to the deadline. Well, those keys can help guide you into this retool for 2024. And that's why, to me, it is, I hope the front office doesn't make any mistake in terms of buying back in. When I mean buying back in, I'm not even talking about like buying. I'm not even talking about, I'm mostly talking about, I still think buying back in, you need to like pump the brakes, look at what you have, and go, we probably still need to really consider trading Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, I just, the only one that I could sit here and realistically say, okay, don't sell him, would be Jordan Montgomery. But I don't, even if this team goes and wins 9 of their next 11 games and says, no, we're going to keep Jordan Montgomery and we'll ship everybody else out, that doesn't give me confidence that they're going to make a run for it. Do I think they could make it close because this division is awful? Yeah, probably, especially if you have Arenado and Goldschmidt playing to this degree. But I'm still going to look at this and say, you need to change a lot going into 2024. So if you go on a run, great. But there's only one guy that I could realistically look at and say, yeah, keep him. And it would be Jordan Montgomery.
Yeah, but I guess here's my question. Who are the guys that we're discussing then? Like, who are the other players that you feel like they would need to sell at the deadline that otherwise wouldn't?
Flaherty, Hicks, probably multiple guys in your rotation. More than likely Paul DeYoung for me, and Tyler.
So let's go through this. Flaherty, I agree. I think he's gone no matter what. Even if you buy back in at the deadline, I think he's gone. Hicks, agreed. I think he's gone no matter what. Who else from there?
Chris Stratton.
I think he's gone no matter what.
I maybe, and even if you don't, like, I don't think you're getting anything of significance for Stratton, so I don't think it makes a significant difference for next year or beyond, whether you keep him or trade him.
Tyler O'Neill? Paul DeYoung?
I think O'Neill's gone no matter what. I don't think you're getting something of significance for DeYoung. So even if you do decide to keep him, I don't think it really changes a whole lot.
I just think with the DeYoung conversation, because I think you're right. I think you're right when you say that you may not get a lot for him, so it doesn't change a lot. I think it's more about giving an opportunity for a win.
Exactly.
Than it is about whatever I get for Paul DeYoung. And look, maybe they can still do that.
Either way, I don't think you're getting significant changes in terms of the contributions from that position either, because DeYoung's value is really what he's doing for you defensively. And Mason Wynn, I'm confident that even if he comes up to the big league level, while there may be struggles offensively, and that should be the expectation, he's going to be fine defensively at shortstop.
Yeah, agreed. I just think it's more about getting him the opportunity in terms of just playing time. And I want to go back to Hicks real quick, because I think he's gone no matter what. But when we talk about this of buying back in, my fear is that he's a piece that becomes not a tradable piece for the Cardinals. Because I could see where they look at him and go, well, hey, if we can just get hot, we know if we get in, anything can happen. Well, what do you need if you get into the playoffs? As much as you need starting pitching, you need a really good bullpen. And we've seen it, a bullpen of Hicks, Gallegos, and Helsley, if Helsley gets back healthy, which was another one of your bullet points for buying back in. Like, that's a formidable back three in a bullpen that can really help you and give you a decent shot at any playoff game. So that's why I think, like, as much as we say Jordan Hicks should be traded, and I agree no matter what happens, because he's going to be one of the top relievers on the market, my fear, though, would be that they can convince themselves of, because if we're saying buying back in, we're buying back in of make the playoffs and just see if anything can happen. We're not talking about buying. Well, if you're going by that motto, I think Hicks' name suddenly starts to become a little bit more iffy in terms of them trying to trade him. And that's why, like, I say they should trade Hicks no matter what. I don't know how the front office would view it if they're going to, quote-unquote, buy back in.
So the guys that I've put in that category of like maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't, depending on what happens over the course of, the next 11 games. I feel like that is the Gio, Stratton. Maybe you would include DeYoung on that category. And then I really think the biggest thing is it's those big moves that we've been discussing. Like, do you consider trading a Dylan Carlson? Do you consider trading a Nootbaar or a Gorman or a Donovan or an Edman? If you were to make those moves, I think that is turning the page to 2024. If you were to buy back in, I think it would require you to keep those guys internally. And the reason why I don't think that's a massive game changer for the Cardinals, why I don't think it's the worst thing in the world for them, is because you can still trade those guys in the offseason as well. I don't think it's precluding you from then going into the offseason, if it doesn't end up working out for you, and saying, you know what, we didn't trade these guys at the deadline, but some of the players that we were looking at targeting are still available in the offseason, as opposed to making that move at the trade deadline. I just don't know, I don't think long term, even if you do buy back in, quote unquote, to them potentially winning the division, I don't think the opportunity cost is all that great if you decide not to trade a Chris Stratton or a Paul DeYoung because of it.
I think it's more of Monty and Hicks. I think that's the one where you really miss if you don't sell them. And
Montgomery's the big one.
Yeah. Monty, and I think Hicks is a big one too. I think Hicks will get a decent, I'm not saying he's getting 3 top 100 prospects by any means. I think they can get something of significance value from Hicks because he's going to be, I think he's one of the top relievers on the market. And there's going to be a bidding war for someone for Jordan Hicks' service to put him in their bullpen.
Yeah. I think it's Monty, and for me, I just think Hicks is gone no matter what because he's a bullpen arm and because you're going to get something of significance for him. Coming up next, I saw last night the MLS All-Stars were going up against Arsenal. And I found myself asking the question why a number of times. We'll discuss it next year on 101 ESPN.
We want your insight and honest opinions on the is exactly where you want to be listening to us. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. It's BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Alex, I just want to ask you a simple question. Did you know that MLS All-Stars play against Arsenal or play against other teams internationally for their All-Star game? Were you aware of this prior to yesterday?
I did not. When I hear the phrase All-Star game, I think All-Stars from different teams playing against All-Stars on other teams, which is just a weird thing that other pro sports do all-star games that way.
Yeah.
T-Bone, were you aware of this phenomenon?
Yeah, you guys are a little behind on this one.
Like the NHL should start doing all-star games against the KHL.
Yeah.
It would make the most sense.
Yeah, why
That's
not?
basically what's happening here. So, they played against Man United in 2010. They played against Arsenal in 2016, Real Madrid a couple of times. And yesterday, it was the MLS All-Stars against Arsenal, who was in its preseason, and Arsenal wiped the floor with them by a final score of 5-0.
Hold on. They played an all-star game against another team's preseason game?
Correct.
That was the equivalent of like a D1 college team that plays a game against a D3 college football team to just get that warm-up in.
So, I am torn on this. I do, to a degree, understand why MLS would do this. I think the explanation is pretty simple. It's like when the Royals have a weekend series against the Yankees or the Cardinals or the Dodgers in Kansas City. The draw is not the Kansas City Royals. The draw is, hey, come to this game to see Aaron Judge or Mookie Betts or Paul Goldschmidt and Nolan Arenado. That is why people go to games in Kansas City, is to see the other team.
Or if you're in Oakland, you go so the Kansas City Royals, you can see the Kansas City Royals.
Exactly. And I think that the draw for MLS, at least in previous years, and then when you're going up against a massive brand like Arsenal, it certainly was the case this year as well, is, hey, if you go to this game, you'll be able to see some of the best players in the world. And I'm not talking about the MLS All-Stars, unfortunately. Do you think that the MLS needs this, though, at this point in time? Or is it at a point with its league where it can get by just showcasing the MLS All-Stars? Alex, where do you fall on that? And T-Bone, I'm certainly curious your perspective on this as well.
At least for me, if you're MLS, you're reaching to MLS fans. And if I'm going to have an All-Star game, I want to see the best of each MLS team playing against each other. I don't want to see the best of an MLS team playing against Arsenal or Man United or Chelsea, because, yeah, that's great, but all of the All-Stars are playing on one team against another team. I want to see them going head-to-head. It's like every other sport does. So, frankly, I think that you've built it up enough. You have enough teams to put All-Stars against All-Stars and make that what you're putting the reach out to for the fans.
Yeah, I think the way the MLS is doing it, I think they have to ask themselves one of two questions. One, do we still want to become a prominent league on the world stage? Because if you do, then I think you're still going to have to go this route. Sure. But if you're going to admit, you know what, we're probably not going to get into the top 5 of leagues across the globe, then I think you push to your MLS audience and try and, whether you want to say grow it or just really hit that fan base and just go to what we're talking about, an East versus West All-Star game. Because now, another factor that played in this a couple years ago was you just didn't have enough teams to really do that. Otherwise, it'd be like the NBA playoffs where everybody gets to go to the All-Star game. Now you do. Now you've got, I think it's 30, if I'm not mistaken, teams. So you have enough teams to where you can really build out rosters for an All-Star game if you're going to do it. I think MLS should personally just move away from it, but I understand why they do it. I think they just have to ask themselves the question, do we still believe we can become one of those top leagues in the world? And getting Messi certainly is going to help in that conversation. So I think right now they're still in a spot where they need to be bringing in teams like Arsenal, bringing in a team like Real Madrid for an All-Star game compared to playing against each other, because I think they still have the idea of the goal of we want to become one of the global powerhouses in terms of where our league ranks. And if you're going to do that, you got to continue to grow worldwide, not just in the States.
Somebody on the text line said, guys, having the USA national team striker play against the MLS All-Stars was at least cool to see. I definitely understand the appeal of this. Like, I really do. If you're a big-time international soccer fan, you saw some of the best players in the world last night go up against the MLS All-Stars. That's cool. That's appealing. And I would also say, like, if you're an Arsenal fan or a EPL League fan in general, last night you got to see Arsenal getting prepared for its season. So I'm sure there were a number of people that bought the MLS package yesterday just for the right to be able to see Arsenal in that one preseason game. Like, I could totally see how that is an appeal for the MLS as well, where they're getting subscriptions based upon that game right there internationally. But I think your point is a good one, T-Bone. Is that what you're trying to accomplish here? Or are you trying to sell your talent? Because last night, let's be totally honest, was not a great sell of MLS's talent. You went up against a team that, yes, they are together and have their specific style of play. They have coalesced as a team at Arsenal, and that is very different than the MLS All-Stars coming together for one night in the middle of July to play this game. That's different. But they won 5-0, man. You had no chance in that game. Arsenal was just like picking you apart defensively. So I think if they want to showcase their players, there's probably a better way to go about this. And I do think, given how many teams you now have and given the exposure of the league, I think you can probably find a way to just go ahead and play MLS's all-star games, the players against one another.
I'll say this, just from my perspective, an all-star game shouldn't end in a shutout.
What?
In any sport.
Well,
even in baseball.
I don't understand the complaint there.
It's boring.
Well,
I want excitement.
I saw 5 goals last night. Are you kidding me?
Yeah, on one side.
Well,
it's pretty one-sided of an all-star game.
Well, we knew that
there were some
happen.
sweet goals too from the Arsenal side. Like, it was, if you're an Arsenal fan, that was a fun
really
game to watch.
Yeah, what a great preseason win for us against the MLS All-Stars. Let's get the season started, guys. This one doesn't matter.
But I think the problem for the MLS, and I think they're still shooting to be a global brand, and I think that's why they're going to continue to do this, because
that's fair.
I agree. I think right now where they are, I think they've kind of, and a lot of people probably won't like when I say this, I think they've probably gotten close to maxing out their audience in the U.S., and I think they can try. I think they're going to continue to try and grow that, but I think where they really, because the MLS commissioner's goal has always said we want to be one of the top leagues in the world. Well, you're still not there. And to do that, I think you got to continue to showcase your talent. Grant, last night probably sent you a step back.
Someone brought up a good point on the text line, BK. We always talk about preseason and how it doesn't matter. Essentially what that was Logan Brown having himself a nice preseason game against the other team that didn't have any good players on it. That's kind of what Arsenal had their backup players in that one against the MLS All-Stars.
They had some of their best players. That's unfair. They didn't bring like their D squad the way that when I went to the U.S. men's national game here in St. Louis, man, I was watching a bunch of dudes that are never going to see the field for the U.S. men's team. That made me mad. I was upset about that. Last night, you at least saw some of the best players for Arsenal. Coming up next, there's one thing that the Cardinals are missing that they can't acquire at the trade deadline, and they have to go out there and do it this offseason. T-Bone has a candidate for that coming up next here on 101 ESPN.
every week on the opening drive.
Adam Wainwright with us is Wednesdays with Wayno.
Morning, guys. How's it going?
We talk life, baseball, and what's happening at Big League Impact with Cardinals pitcher Adam Wainwright. Wednesdays with Wayno is presented by Scott Lee Heating Company. Never miss an interview with Wayno at 101ESPN.com or on the 101 mobile app. 101 ESPN Sports Center.
Tanner Hendrickson here with a Sports Center update brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling. Cardinals beat Miami yesterday 6-4 as they swept them in their 3-game set. And they start a 4-game set in Chicago tonight. 7:20 will be first pitch as Steven Matz will be on the mound for the St. Louis Cardinals. Marcus Stroman will be on the mound for the Chicago Cubs. And tomorrow morning at 8:45, you can hear from St. Louis Cardinal Randy Flores as he'll be joining the morning show to talk about the Cardinals draft class. The Sports Center update was brought to you by Saliga Heating and Cooling, an independent American Standard heating and air conditioning dealer.
They are St. Louis. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN.
You know what you need if you're the Cardinals, and that is a guy that's going to lead your rotation, because we all dreamt for years on Jack Flaherty being the ace, and at times he has been the ace of the Cardinals, but I think everyone knows that his time in St. Louis is coming to an end. So who's the next guy? Well, you don't have the next guy. I mean, there's talent in the minor leagues, but you need to go find that guy. If you're actually going to do what everyone assumes you're going to do, and that is keep the core together to try to make another run next year and win the Central.
That was Greg Amsinger on the morning show earlier today alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson. I am Brandon Kiley. You've got BK and Ferrario here on 101 ESPN. Alex, I think everybody in the world that is a Cardinals fan agrees with that sentiment. The Cardinals are lacking a true number one starter. Here's the problem. I don't think there's any chance, any way really, for the Cardinals to find that guy at the trade deadline. That is an offseason move. This will require the Cardinals to go out and spend significant money to fix their lack of a number one starter problem. You can find guys, like we said earlier with Clark Schmidt, that can be middle of the rotation starters for you. You can find somebody else from another organization that slots in as maybe even a number 2 or a number 3. Number 1, that's coming via free agency. Tanner, we were talking earlier because we've talked about, Aaron Nola and Shane Bieber previously was in this discussion. I think we can write him off now, but Blake Snell certainly would qualify as a number one starter. There's a guy coming over from Japan that you could talk yourself into. One player that I don't think we've talked enough about being in this category is Lucas Giolito. I view him more as like a 2-3 right now, but when you think to the offseason and you project what the Cardinals could do with this rotation, how does Lucas Giolito potentially fit into those plans?
I think Giolito should be the Cardinals' number one target this offseason because I don't think they're going to be signing Nola. And honestly, I'm not sure how much I'm really in on Nola after his down year. I don't think they're going to be willing to offer Snell the deal that he's going to get, even though they love lefties. And Urias the same way, and he has too many flashing red lights as well. Giolito's kind of the lead guy for the second tier of that top-end pitching market, I would say. Kind of right there with Montgomery. I would take Giolito, and the big reason for me to sign Giolito is I think, one, you're going to sign him to a contract that pays him as like a number 2, and I still think he can become a number 1 because I look at Giolito, and his numbers are so similar to Zach Wheeler before Zach Wheeler became a number 1. I just looked at Giolito's really taken off since 2019. He had that rough year in 2018 where he had a 6 ERA as a starter. Since 2019 to this year, which is age 24 to 28, he has been healthy. He's been durable. He started 29-plus games in all those years outside of the pandemic year. He's thrown 705 innings, 122 starts, and he has a ERA plus of 112, so 12% above league average. And when you look at him, he strikes out 10.5 guys per 9 innings. So he's got the swing and miss stuff that the Cardinals are desperately looking for with a 3.88 ERA. And then I look at Zach Wheeler, who did miss a year in some years during this time because of injury. Zach Wheeler in this same stretch, age 24 to age 28, made fewer starts at 78, had a 3.77 ERA, and he only struck out 8.9 per 9 innings. Since he's been in Philadelphia, he's been a guy that's been able to develop into a number 1 that everybody would love to have in their staff, and he's gotten more swing and misses. He strikes out almost 10 per 9 innings now. Wheeler did not take off until his age 31 season. And you could argue maybe his age 30 season in 2020 during the pandemic year, but he became a true number one in 2021 at the age of 31. And I think Giolito reminds me so much of Wheeler in terms of has swing and miss stuff. He's been consistent in terms of innings pitch. And the numbers, as I just read off, are very similar. I think Giolito, when he signs with somebody, he's going to sign like a number 2 type deal. But I think he has a chance to develop into a number 1 type starter because I still think he's got more to give than what he has right now. And right now, he's a really good, solid pitcher for the Chicago White Sox.
I like the idea of Lucas Giolito, and I think that could be a Cardinals type move to where they're aggressive, but maybe you're going aggressive after a guy that everybody else is looking at, Nola and Blake Snell and Rodriguez this offseason, and the Cardinals go after a Lucas Giolito. Here's my only thing with it, though. Yes, his numbers show that he has the potential to be there, and he has pitched like that before. But I still feel like there's question marks going into the season if you're putting him in that spot. So if you go after a Lucas Giolito, I think you also have to back that up with another guy that you can see as a 2-3 with Miles Mikolas. Do you understand what I'm saying? So it can't be like a Lucas Giolito, Miles Mikolas, and then that next tier down. I still think you need to have somebody in that frame or range with Mikolas and Giolito to make that 1 through 3 a little bit more scary.
I would agree with that, I guess. I think my fear, though, is that with Giolito, the contract that I kind of expect him to get in BK, I'm curious if you think this would be similar to what he might get, is very similar to what Wheeler got when he signed, because Wheeler was not a 1 and he got a 5 by 118. So like around $23 million per year, depending on how you kind of move that money around. I mean, you can allocate it where he gets less in year 1 and pay him more in the back end. So then you don't have as much money to spend on another guy. But I think would you feel confident with like a Giolito Mikolas 1-2 punch? Like I feel pretty good about that. Now, maybe you bring in another arm to your point, but I just don't know if they're going to be willing to spend on 2 guys for $20 million at the top of the rotation. Maybe that's where the trade has to
take place. Maybe that's where you need to be aggressive in the offseason to make a blockbuster type trade to bring in that other guy.
I think they have to be willing to spend $20 million on 2 different pitchers.
Yeah.
That's where I would say, yes, I agree with you, T-Bone. I think, like, I can talk myself into Lucas Giolito as the number 1 starter for the Cardinals in 2024. I can talk myself into it. But it would require me to then have, like, a Sonny Gray as my number 2. And I don't know that a lot of Cardinals fans love that idea, but I think you could find yourself talking yourself into it if it ends up being maybe they trade for the guy that we've, like, the topic du jour today for me specifically, Clark Schmidt, right? 27-year-old right-handed pitcher, has a 4.3 ERA this year in 100 innings for the Yankees. Let's throw him in as your number 4 starter. Miles Mikolas is your number 3. Lucas Giolito is your number 1. And then you go out there, and in that Sonny Gray, Alex Cobb, Andrew Heaney, that level of free agent that has some swing and miss stuff that you don't have currently with Miles Mikolas, you sign one of those guys. Now I'm talking myself into it. Now I've got a top 4 that includes Giolito, one of those guys I just mentioned, Mikolas, and Schmidt. I think that is better than what you had in your rotation this year, but it requires serious investment. And that is where the Cardinals have to find a way to break from what their previous model was with their rotation.
What do you think someone like Cobb or
I don't know,
Gray will get? Like the deal that I kind of think of, and
15 to 17 million, probably.
Okay, then this is what I'm exactly thinking of. I think you give Giolito the deal that I just mentioned, kind of 5 by 118. That's kind of the ballpark. That's what Zach Wheeler got, and he wasn't a 1 when he signed that deal.
Just call it 5 by 125. Inflation, $25 million a year.
Okay, so $25 million a year for Giolito. The other deal, and we talked about this, I think during the All-Star week. The other deal that I think you got to look and try and find is who's your John Gray? Who's the guy you give a 4-year but $56 million deal to? And that's why I asked, do you think Sonny Gray would get something like that? Maybe Gray gets a little bit more, but I think Gray, Cobb, I think those guys are in this conversation of they're not going to really break the bank, and they're probably sitting around $15 million to $17 million a year. So if you get your John Gray type deal like the Rangers have, and you spend like a Zach Wheeler-esque deal on Giolito, I can see how you go to next season with Giolito 1, you go into it with Alex Cobb or Sonny Gray as the 2, Mikolas as the 3, Matt's 4 or Clark Schmidt 4, and then you've got Matz there as well. Like that feels like a pretty good rotation going into 2024.
Feels like it. I still think I'm wanting a little bit more out of that number 2.
Maybe, but I don't think you're going to get it.
Yeah.
I think what we're saying right now is like the ceiling of what you're going to be able to get. I think Sonny Gray, because of his age, is probably looking at the Evaldi deal to stick with the Texas Rangers. Evaldi got a 2-year deal worth $34 million. I think something like that could be the Sonny Gray type of a range. And I think the same thing is true for, Cobb, Heaney. All of those guys in that group are probably in that $15 to $20 million on a 2 to 3 year contract type of a range. And I think the Cardinals just have to get comfortable with giving up $40 million combined between their top 2 starters next year, spending $60 million on their top 3 players in their rotation. They're not far from that this year. They've got $17 million to Waino, $19 million going to Miles Mikolas, and then $10 million going to their number 3. So they're not all that far away. If you're willing to spend that on this version of Adam Wainwright, you damn well better be willing to spend that kind of money on one of those legit number 2 or 3 starters that are on the market. We'll hit the rewind coming up next.
charitable causes and show off your fantasy skills with a chance to win prizes all season long. Space is limited. You can find all the details on how to sign up for Big League Impact's 2023 fantasy football season now at 101ESPN.com. Giving you the picture, the real big St. Louis sports picture. It's BK and Ferrario, live from the Car Shield studio on 101 ESPN. Let's run it back with a daily rewind on BK and Ferrario.
Brought to you by Stewart's American Mortgage. Google the Bagel Loan, featuring 0 fees and 0 closing costs.
Alongside Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. If you've missed anything from today's show, be sure to check out the podcast page, 101ESPN.com, and the free 101 ESPN app is where you can go to find it. Alex, the Cardinals are back in action tonight against the Chicago Cubs. Steven Matt's on the mound going up against Marcus Stroman. Stroman's been great this year. Didn't go well for him the last time that the Cardinals faced him, though. Steven Matz is a guy that I am kind of interested in watching, believe it or not, the rest of the way. Because of how horrible this season has gone for him for the most part. Hey, man, last couple of starts have mostly been okay for Steven Matz. I would like to see him to continue to capitalize on this, Alex, because I do think there's a real chance that he's still your number 5 starter going into 2024, for as much as Cardinals fans don't want to hear it.
Yeah, I mean, prior or post August 1st trade deadline, I want to see Steven Matz out there every 5th day, regardless of how it looks, because I need to get a good temperature on who he is for next season. Can you be a number 4 for us? Are you just a number 5, or are you going to be a guy that's only able to start 10 to 12 games, and then we're talking about a bullpen because you go quiet for a couple of months? So he's the one that I think is probably amongst pitchers most intriguing for the rest of 2023 because of his role for 2024 if they're in this competing window.
Give me 5 innings, 2 earned runs, 3 earned runs on average. I know that's not a great ERA over time, but that'll keep the Cardinals in the game. If you can do that consistently, Steven Matz, you are a guy that can be in this rotation as a legit number 5 starter. And he's getting paid $11 million. That's number 5 starter money.
BK,
that's what it costs now.
I'm sick of this 5 innings crap. Give me 7 innings every 5th day. Otherwise, you're not on this team.
For Alex Ferrario and Tanner Hendrickson, I'm Brandon Kiley. Coming up next is the Fast Lane here on 101 ESPN.
Weekday morning starting at 7. It's the opening drive with